The work session of the Annapolis City Council for Thursday, May 26, 2022 will be called to order at 2:11. Apologise for the delay. At this time, would everyone willing and able please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay. Mr. City Attorney, please present the first item on the agenda.
Yes, sir. The first item on the agenda is ID-2822, proposed budget amendments.
And before we get started, I want to embarrass Katie by saying happy birthday. For your birthday. For your birthday, you get a 4-hour session.
Yes, we planned this just for your birthday.
Jody, you taking the lead?
Yeah, so I'll have the city manager talk about some topics on some of these amendments today. But just to give you an overview of what we have for you here, each of you should have a listing of all of the amendments that the council members contacted us with. And there's 3 pages that have the amendments, regular amendments for the operating budget 1 through 44. We have 5 amendments on the fee schedule and 1 for the fine schedule. Now, with that, we did not give the individual amendment pages yet that we write up for the ordinance. We have drafted those, but there's been some changes, so we're going to wait and draft those in after our discussions today, with any changes that have come up so far. Then what we did on the next page is show you the status, giving you a running status of our reserve for one-time uses. A lot of the amendments are impacting that reserve, so we wanted to tell you where we're at coming into this amendment process, given what's happened with the commitments in the union agreements, what we think we have left for amendments. And then there's a page that follows that shows how the council's proposed amendments would impact the reserve and the drawdown on that reserve. And you'll see at the end of that, if all these amendments were to pass, we'd have $428,000 left in that reserve. The last page is giving you a summary of where the ARPA funding is at currently and where it would be if all these amendments were passed or accepted. So that some of these amendments use the ARPA funding instead of the reserve for one-time uses. And so that last page in your packet that's stapled together is the ARPA funding. Yeah, am I missing something? Oh, it's a negative. Okay, yes, I need to pass that out, to point this out to you. On the reserve for one-time uses, if all of your amendments pass, we'd be in the negative. We don't have enough funding. If you notice, on the next to the last page in your packet, there's brackets around the $428,000. That means that we're overspent by that much if all the amendments are passed. So consider that when you're going through the amendment process. And we also have some concerns about some of these amendments, which we sent some emails out the last 48 hours about some of our concerns with some of these. And 4 amendments were pulled. And we'll talk about some overarching concerns on the amendments. I don't know, David, you want to do that right up front? Or address them as we go along?
Yeah. What I would like to do is sort of address the one-time money that we have. So we had the great good fortune of having a lot of one-time money this year. So it's money that flowed through the 15% reserve, down through the this budget stabilization and capital reserve, and down into the one-time funding. So we have a lot of that money. So there have been a lot of innovative attempts to use that money for things that we normally would not classify as one-time uses. So I think maybe part of this discussion needs to be to really define what one-time uses are. Because typically in the past, it's been to buy things. So for example, last year's budget had money for self-contained breathing apparatus for fire. So it's about, I think, $1 million that we spent last year. So that's a good one-time use because that's a one-time purchase. We've also done studies that begin and end and are very well defined. Programs are somewhat questionable in my mind because once you establish a program, it's hard to disestablish the program. And so there's, especially when we're hiring employees to do the program. So I think the council really needs to decide if we want to take on programs with one-time funding, thinking that at the end of the year that's going to be the end of that program. You know, another example is the fare-free transit, right? So we establish fare-free transit, we pay for it with one time. What do we do next year? Because people are going to expect that to continue. It's hard, once you establish something like that, it's hard to stop. It's hard to tell people, well, now you're going to have to pay after you didn't pay for a whole year. If we want to do things like that, it should be in the recurring budget. It should be in the operating budget. It really shouldn't be one time. And that's just an example. We've got lots of other examples. So, you know, maybe the discussion at the beginning should be, how do we define the uses that are applicable to this one-time funding? Because otherwise, if we set it up as one-time funding, but we don't really intend to stop it at the end of the year, then it really just adds to the budget deficit that we have. And that's not really prudent budgeting. So I don't mean to diss any of the proposals, because we have a lot of good proposals, but I think we just need to decide what really qualifies for one-time purposes, this one-time money.
Thank you, Alderman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Gerald, could we easily rectify that problem with one-time spending by creating pilot programs or something that would give it a life expectancy? Because we have a lot of programs that we as a council would like to implement in the short term. And if it works out well, then in the future years, it'll be up to us to decide how to fund it or to discontinue it. So might that not be an answer to those one-time funds?
Well, that certainly is the creativity that everybody's using for this, is saying that this program is going to be a pilot program. And we'll check and see what the results are, and if the results are good, we would add it. And that's fair, but we just need to be prepared at the end to say, there's no money for this, and we can't continue, which is, in a lot of cases, a hard thing to do with a program, especially when people come to rely on it and get used to it and expect it. If it's a service type thing where people do get used to it, it's hard to stop a service. You know that. Over the years, we've tried to do that, and it's hard to stop any service, even, you know, to take it out of an existing budget and to save money. It's really hard to cut services.
Well, I think if the expectation is set, then we should be able to stick with it. So any programs that we decide to implement, and I'm talking to my colleagues who make this decision, we should say this is a one-year pilot program, that's the term I was using, pilot program, that will be evaluated and potentially could go away at the end of the year. But I think if we put that caveat on it, then everyone should set that expectation that that program may disappear next year. And if we really value it, if the data supports the success of the program, then it's up to us to find a way to pay for it or not. So, you know, that's just an answer for us.
Yeah, and just keep in mind that we have a structural deficit. So for those things that we decide should continue to move forward, that just adds to that funding deficit that we have already. So We plan to use ARPA for this year's structural deficit. We have ARPA money for next year as well, but then it ends. So we have a couple of years that we can get our financial house in order so we don't have a structural deficit come FY '25.
Mr. Mayor, I did have a couple of questions for Ms. Dickinson about her explanation, but I'll come back to those if there's more comments about what city manager has said.
I think I had Alderman Tierney first and then Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Dickinson, just correct me if I'm wrong, but the starting balance of the one-time use, the $6,546,717, does that vary from the budget book?
So that is the projected balance at the end of this fiscal year.
Okay.
And that presumes that my projections for revenue and expense, which I did back in January,
Yes.
February timeframe, pan out, and that's what our ending balance is. It could be better, it could be worse.
But it's different than what's on page 22 of the budget book.
So, hold on.
Are you looking at the revised page
Yeah.
20? Okay.
Yeah, where is,
It agrees to projected FY '22 fund balance after transfer of reserves. So it's the fourth one from the right.
right, the fund balance of $4,010,294?
So look at the line for, if you got the revised page assigned for one-time uses,
Yep,
and you look at the fourth column from the right,
yep.
projected FY '22 fund balance after transfer of reserves, $6,546,717. Is that not what you have? Are you looking at the previous one that had,
No, I don't want to take up time here. It's fine. I'll do it offline. Okay. The second question I have is, what is your comfort level in the one-time use of the hold money, for lack of a better word, for the union agreements and the city employee bonuses?
okay, so the only piece of the union, if you look down that first page, the last number, the 1,286,500, that is what we projected we would pay out in, I'm calling them bonuses, I don't know if that's the right term, one-time cash payments to employees in lieu of giving a very large COLA. So those are one-time. In some of the agreements, they may be year one and year two of the agreements. So if you look at that 1,286,000, that's what's in the budget in FY '23. That's what we already put in there. The number below it, the 1,167,000, are the one-time bonuses that would be in FY '24 that are being committed to at this time in the two-year agreements. We need to set aside those monies out of this reserve in case FY '22 and '23 don't replenish the reserve. We can't count on the excess fund balance until we know what the results of the year are. So we have to set those aside, even though that second number, the 1,167,000, is FY '24.
Got it. Thank you. And I found my revised page 20.
Okay, all right, yeah, I have both of mine in here too, and I get confused sometimes when I'm looking at them, but
Take out the old one. Thank you.
Alderman Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, so I'm just looking now, comparing, so the page that says proposed amendments impact on the reserve for one-time uses. And then we have another proposed amendment impacts on the reserve for one-time uses.
If you
What's the difference
take,
between those two?
if you take the first page, the total of 2.5 at the bottom, so what it does, it takes the 6 million that we start with for the year, takes out everything that we already have in the budget, and then what Jody just talked about the 1.1.
Oh, I see.
And then you get down to 2.5, and then the next page lists all the amendments that are currently proposed, which gets us down to the negative 428 if all of those were to pass.
So out of that 2.5.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, so you're drawing down, it's just a continuation of that column showing the drawdown of the 2.5 million, and it ends up with negative.
Okay, and as far as the city manager's question, I mean, I agree with my colleague in terms of how Alderman Finlayson put it. I think we just had to need to be clear, and I'm not sure what the best way to do this is part of the process, but be clear that whatever gets approved as an amendment using the one-time use monies is not, it's going to expire after a year. And we would have to reintroduce it as a brand new amendment for next year's budget unless it gets included in the budget from introduction, right? You know, I think the one area which I know the city manager and I spoke a little bit over email about funding positions out of that money. And I think that is one area we'd have to be cautious about because, I mean, how would that differ? Because I think, and I agree with where I think the city manager was going in the sense that we need to be cautious about essentially even just having a new contract position, because contract positions do get included in the budget year after year, right? But if it's just going to be a one-time position, like I went in there just for an idea for, even if it's just a consultant or temporary help just for a year, is there a way we should phrase that, or are you recommending that we kind of try not to fund any positions using one-time use monies, even if they're meant to be temporary, or?
So the way we've done in the past is if we have something that we want to study, we say exactly that, what we want to study, and we hire a consultant, not a contract employee who sort of comes onto the payroll, but a consultant has defined scope of services and a defined price for those services, and that's very well fixed. With a contract employee, it's not. It tends to carry over from year to year, and it's a lot less well-defined.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. And I think that would be a restriction, I guess, that I would support, because I do think we need to be cautious with everything that's been said in terms of moving forward. And I guess that's that's kind of akin to, I guess, what planning and zoning often does with, they have a pool of money which they often use for various consulting services, right? Be it traffic or comp planning or.
I wanted to add that there's, a consultant is usually somebody who's working with their own tools in their own space on your project. If you wanted to use one-time monies for a contract employee that you feel is a one-time thing, the work has got to be very specifically defined and have an end. Here's the beginning of this product, here's the end of this product, and have that work defined so that we know the work ends. After this period of time, it's end. It's a project that's ending. It has an end date, a beginning date, and an ending date. If you wanted to do a contract employee, you have to define it.
Based more on deliverables as opposed to just.
Yes, like you would a consultant. Here's something we need help with, here's the time frame, it starts and it stops.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing in some of these are programs I think everybody would like to see take hold, and they're pilots, but there's a lot of them, and they're saying, if it works out, then we're going to try to find money again. And then as they layer on, we had several of them in here, that just adds to that deficit that we're going to face in 2 years' time that we've already talked about. You know, when we saw that line graph that the Finance Committee had us prepare that showed that difference in if expenses keep climbing and our revenues don't keep up with it in 2 years, we're going to have to take some kind of action.
Okay. My last question is still related to the one-time use money, because I know last year we passed a couple of amendments that had also used one-time use monies, and like we've said, it expires. The money, if it's not implemented, it goes back into, I guess, the general fund. But you know, we had a couple of projects last year which were amended that weren't able to be enacted over the year. So I think there's the small transit that Alderwoman Tierney had. I forget how much money you got for it, but there's some kind of small, on-demand transit. There's the some kind of 100K for that, and then there's community survey. Forest Drive, SOFO, materials, out for economic development. Then there was another one,
Community survey.
community survey, which I don't think were implemented. I'm just kind of curious what the challenges were in terms of what can we do to make sure whatever amendments we decide on do get implemented. If there were certain barriers we can kind of address moving forward to make sure
Yes.
things do get
So,
implemented, and also what happens to that money if it does just
well,
go-
it's back, if you notice, the ones that we had in there from last year that we felt we wanted to move forward with, the 50,000 is the first, if you look on that page that has the reserve for one-time uses, it says City Manager Office Community Survey, $50,000. This page that's showing you the beginning, the 6.5
Oh, I
million,
see.
the reserve, that we put them back in there to earmark those funds, to say, these are some things that we need to put back in there because they haven't been done yet.
But so these are not in the budget as introduced, but you're,
Yeah, they
Or
are.
they are.
Yeah,
They are, okay.
they're in that, if you look at what we already have in the budget to be used from this reserve, the total is $2,797,800, and that's what these first 15, 20 items add up to.
okay, so
So they're already in the
they
budget.
rolled over from.
Yes. So we looked at those things that didn't get done. And to your second question about how do you make sure, that's another issue. A lot of programs coming at us, and we don't have the band, some offices may not have the bandwidth to get that done. And I think that was one of the things with the survey. It just didn't get off the ground with everything else that's going on in the city manager's office. So, and then, you know, if you notice some of these programs, a lot of them are going to fall in OCS, the Office of Community Services, and they've only got 3 people in the office. So it's a lot, and sometimes they can't all get done.
And maybe maybe we're partly, but maybe we need to regularly have updates on that at the finance committee or whatever relevant committee there may be for the one-time use, just so we can periodically get updates on some of these projects and what the needs might be if we want to see them proceed. That's all I have. Thank you.
So just want to introduce our new legislative policy analyst. She was here. Oh, there you go. Hey there, how you doing? This is Cynthia Reuter. If you want to just come up and say a couple of words, you'll be seeing these guys a lot. How you doing?
Hit the little green button there. Just introduce yourself. You got about 40 seconds. And then we got
My
to get
name
you back
is
to work.
Cynthia Reuter, and I'm your new legislative and policy analyst, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone and writing your visions for the future of Annapolis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Regina's got some stuff for you. And I'll be right down.
Alderman Finlayson.
Yes, I'm going to have to ask Ms. Dickinson to help me, because I'm not seeing the same numbers. Maybe I don't have the right page, but please walk me through this document.
All right, so that's what,
Well, let me ask the question so I can tell you what I'm missing.
Okay.
The first 2.5 pages are our amendments, correct?
Yep.
There are 44 of them?
actually, the first 1, 2, 3, 3 pages.
Mine is
2
double-sided. Is yours double-sided?
Yeah, double-sided, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, I'm looking at page 3, I guess. Because at the middle of page 3, then it goes to amendments that are affiliated with R23, which are our fees.
Right, I'm considering
And
those
then-
on the amendment, that's part of the amendment listing. But
Okay,
if-
and then it goes to R24. Okay. And then it goes to this page,
Correct,
okay, which has the items that are already included in the mayor's budget.
yes, if you look down that, if you look over to the left, there's a description there. It says amounts included in the FY23 proposed budget.
Okay.
That's that whole group. Then,
I got that. Let
Okay.
me ask
Okay.
you the questions, please.
All right.
So that means that we have spent 3.7 million for these amendments that are in the mayor's budget.
So that means there's $3.7 million left.
Left, okay. And then I have on my sheet 1.167 allocated for union agreements.
Correct, and that is
Okay.
the amount I spoke to earlier that's related to FY '24.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear on all
Okay.
these numbers, okay? I'm not questioning anything.
No,
I'm just-
okay.
I just need to be clear. And so the ending balance of 2.58 is what we have available to us at this time to use as our policy
Correct.
discretion.
Correct.
Okay, all right, I'm good. The next sheet, again, is our amendments, and then the very last sheet, which looks like that, goes back to the ARPA funds, 6.4, and the general fund that is being used, 1.5 of the ARPA fund going to the general fund, which brings us to 4.9.
Correct.
I guess my first question is, how is that amount being utilized? Where can I find that on these sheets?
Okay, so the
That
four,
number.
the 4.9 is, as you said, the ARPA funds that have not yet been allocated. And it was the administration's intent in the proposed budget to hold that over for FY '24 to help cover some of the difference in our cost exceeding our projected revenues for FY '24. We were going to use the rest of that ARPA funding to fill that gap.
So when we started this whole process, we knew we had 4.9 in
Yes.
funding to be used for budget stabilization?
So I don't want to confuse it with the budget stabilization fund.
Okay.
It is to stabilize the FY '24 revenue in the FY '24 budget. We would use the remainder of that ARPA funding in FY '24.
So we're not talking FY '23, we're talking FY
Yes.
'24.
Yes, it was our intent to hold that over and use that in FY '24.
So the entire 4.9
Yes.
that we are holding over for FY '24,
Correct.
okay? The bottom line on that page is the 3.8. Is that to be used for '23?
No, so if you follow down from the 4.9 million, we have a list of amendments that were proposed that are proposing to use some of that 4.9. And then what would be left to carry into '24 would be 3.8.
So the amendments, 10, 16, 18, 19, 24, 25, are being paid for out of the 4.9.
Yes,
And for '23, not '24,
correct.
which reduces the amount that we have for '24 down to 3.8.
Correct.
So that 3.8 is untouchable if we follow the recommendation of staff for funding of '24, correct?
So I would say the recommendation of the staff is to carry 4.9 million into '24. So
I got it. I got it.
I don't want to, I don't want to recommend or not recommend the amendments. Those are ideas of the council, and we will proceed as you decide.
Okay, I understand. So those amendments, those 6 amendments, and I'm talking to my colleagues now, are amendments that in essence have been funded by these ARPA funds.
No.
Well, if we make the decision to follow the staff's recommendation, those 6 items have funding that's taken from potentially '24 funding. And am I correct?
Yes, so I will clarify that some of these may have come to us from council members saying, I want to use this money and use one-time funds, but it was clearly not a one-time issue, so we would put them in the ARPA funding category. And Katie, you'll have to clarify which ones we actually changed the source on because it looked clearly like a continuing expense.
Okay, but if the council member says that they want it as a one-time expense, then that's what we should honor, right?
Yeah, but then we take them off this list, put them on the other list, and then you'd have to be prepared that everything ends. And when you have stuff like training and education.
Do you understand the confusion,
Yeah.
at least that I feel, and I suspect others may also, between the 23 and the 24? And I'm thinking now these 6 items don't need the same kind of debate as the other 36
yeah.
items on the list.
Yeah, if I could just add, the only one that was proposed for ARPA was Amendment 10. All the other ones, 16, 18, 19, 24, and 25, were all one-time requests.
So they should not
Or a
be-
statement that said, we'll try and find the revenue, like the finance
Yeah.
committees.
Okay, so, well, that's one that's off the list in theory. We still have to act on these, but I'm just trying to get to what our responsibility is right now. And again, on the 6, to codify whatever discussions we have today. But that leaves the other 6 items that could be or may not be. Okay.
Yeah, so.
I'm clear now.
Okay,
Thank you.
our attempt in doing this is to show you how everything listed out and the big picture, so that this is the opportunity for the council to talk about their proposed amendments, and then, but we wanted to show you how many we had and what happened to the numbers after we put everything on paper. So that was our purpose of giving you this overview.
Thank you.
Alderman Tierney, then Alderman Savage.
Yeah, just really quickly to piggyback on that, City
Yeah.
Manager Jarrell, would it be, and I'm guilty as charged on the Assistant City Attorney, but is it fair to say that any use of those ARPA funds, which we had hoped to appropriate to the fiscal year 2023 budget, is that much more we have to find to prevent the anticipated, the projected structural deficit we will have after the ARPA fund?
Yeah, that's correct. So any recurring cost that we add increases the structural deficit.
Right. It's misleading. The ARPA money is to be used for the structural deficit. So any money we take from ARPA is a detriment to that objective.
We want to go in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Subtracting instead of
They're
that.
big numbers, so I just want to make sure everybody understands them.
Alderman Savage, then Alderman Gay.
Well, but it would seem like for the ARPA money, we should use the same philosophy though that we do for one-time use, because I mean, I'm guilty as well, but there are some positions on here, but it would seem like it'd be more appropriate to use the same philosophy again and just have them be 1-year position, or just a more task-based position, right? Because our ARPA money is going to go away, right? So why should we it'd be unwise, I think, to put recurring costs on here when it's going to go away, and we'll have to put that back to the general budget somehow.
There are similarities to the nature of the 2 pieces of funding. The reason that we separated them is the current budget, as proposed, has 1.5 million of recurring expenses that are above anticipated recurring revenues. And we are filling that with the ARPA funds because that's what we plan to use them for. We were given the monies, we used some in 20, we didn't need any this year. We think we're going to need 1.5, and then we can use it in the next year so that we can delay any action on revenues. Although we are recognizing by putting them in this bucket that they are continuing expenses and will require more of a revenue adjustment in 25. So that's how we're different. There are similarities, but there are also differences in what we're calling ARPA funding, which we know are our operating expenses that we're using that money for. And we're identifying those and saying, this is the gap that we're looking at. This is how it may grow. And if revenues don't compensate for it, we'll have an action. Whereas the stuff that's coming out of one-time would be clearly defined one-time project stuff.
Okay, yeah, I think I see what you're saying. Yeah, because part of the intention of the ARPA was to help cover.
It is, and
especially for transit.
And the federal government continues to encourage us to use it for operating, projects, capital needs. They encouraged it. I get emails from them saying, please keep spending this on your operating funds. So it is what we decided to use it for, and so that's, and the federal government wants us to use it.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to use that to cover existing positions where we're having some issues with revenue, to help cover them. But as far as adding new positions, I think at the very least, perhaps they should just be contractual, and maybe that is the case. Let's see, because the other, that was the intention with the position or consultant I had proposed, but let's see, there's another one on there, isn't there, for, assistant city attorney. Would that be a civil service position or a contract? That Amendment
So
16.
what we had originally put in the budget was some funding for a contract employee, but the finance committee passed this, proposed this amendment to make it a full-time civil service position. So this is the funding to take what we already had in the budget and make that a civil service position.
Okay.
So it is a full-time permanent position.
Okay. Well, I might have some concerns about not the position itself, but about having it be civil service. I just feel like it'd be wise to just keep it be a contractual position until we're really sure what's going to happen after the ARPA funds run out. Okay. The other question I had was if you clarify some of the costs for, let's see, on the proposed amendments impact on the reserve for one-time uses, you've got the 1.2 for potential city employee bonuses, and then you have down below 1.1 million for additional amount of one-time use committed to union agreements. So can you, and I know some of this you might not be able to talk about, but for the potential, so I guess separate from those two items, and I guess some of it we don't know, but I guess separate from those two items, what's baked into the budget as far as step increase? Are there going to be merit increases or any kind of COLA that's already built into the budget for reps or non-reps? I guess for non-reps.
So if, let's just take, when we were developing the budget, we made projections of what we may need for union negotiations at that time, based on the information at that time. And we put one number in the general fund, $3,762,000, to earmark for those purposes. Of that $3,762,000 is this $1,286,000 that's in the one-time. It's a one-time. The rest of that was for any COLAs or any other adjustments that were made to the compensation packages. It was a one number combined for all unions and employee groups. Because as we proposed it, the budget did not have anything but steps in it. So we have that number set aside. And I can't speak to any details of the union agreements except for the ones that have been fully ratified, which, the police is the only one that's been fully ratified.
So are both those items subject to negotiation, current negotiations, both the city employee bonuses and the amount you have set aside for union, that 1.2 and the 1.1 million?
Yes, so the police compensation package did not include any one-time awards. So none of that there is subject to a completed agreement, although we do have tentative agreements being considered at this time.
So the city employee bonuses, that's something that's also being negotiated?
I wouldn't,
One-time
I don't know if you
bonus.
call it continuing to be negotiated, because we've concluded negotiations at this point. I'll let the city manager talk to that.
So we have agreement with all of the unions at this point. Police has ratified theirs. Fire and ASME has not ratified theirs yet.
I mean, the reason I'm asking is because I'm trying to get an understanding of that, because that's obviously going to impact how much we have in terms of one-time use monies to use, right? And, there's some things that obviously if it's negotiated in the contracts, we don't have any kind of wiggle room on. But I know and I don't want to reveal any numbers that we spoke about, but, we've heard various numbers in the closed meeting. So, okay, I guess we'll just have to wait for the details on that. But I guess for my colleagues' sake, I'm still not clear if this is the final amount we have left for one-time use money, or if that's going to be fluctuating a little bit.
So the union process is concluded when the council accepts the agreements as fully ratified, but the negotiation process is finished at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to clarify, the American Rescue Plan funding, they send us all emails encouraging us to spend it. And it is not explicitly stated that it has to be used for replacement or loss to revenue for the city. In fact, it is highly encouraged, and other cities have done a really good job in supporting social programming and economic viability of citizens in their communities. And I'll read straight from the Treasury's page as it relates to the American Rescue Plan dollars. Respond to the far-reaching public health and negative economic impacts of the pandemic by supporting the health of communities and helping households, small businesses, impacted industries, nonprofits, and the public sector recover from economic impacts. Provide premium pay for essential workers, offer additional support for those who have and will bear the greatest health risk because of their service in critical sectors, which I believe we did once already. And then lastly, invest in broadband and internet infrastructure, which I believe we attempted to do as well, but I think the state or the county took it over. But again, it does not have to be used for replacing any revenue, any lost revenue from the pandemic. That's totally up to the council. And again, if you look at Baltimore City has, and I wish we had done something like this, they have a page on their website where all the CARES funding and all the ARPA dollars that they've received, they have an interactive maps where you can go on and view how they've spent the money and what services they put the money towards. And just like in Chicago, just like in California, they've put the money to the people because that's essential. And that includes our employees, and just making sure that they have the benefit of the doubt. And also, I would agree with my colleague, and I agree with the finance director as it relates to the use of the rescue plan funding. It should be, if you intend to use the American Rescue Plan money, at least with my amendment, I had no intentions of making sure that it was reoccurring. I went to the state and local nonprofits to try to figure out ways to make sure that I wouldn't have to come back to one-time funds or the general funds for next year. And so I did have the same question. I mean, what was the plan for staffing? I seen there was a assistant city attorney as well as the fourth assistant city manager listed in there as well. So.
Okay, thank you. And could you just give me a rough estimate in percentages of what the structural deficit looks like, so that you're projecting for the next 2 years? Because in terms of a percentage, I know that you budget conservatively, and we usually always end up doing better than you say because you're conservative, and we appreciate that. But in terms of a percentage, because our structural deficit is COVID related, I believe we have not had a structural deficit until we had to deal with COVID. This city lost revenues like every city in America did, like every business in America did, and that was what the money was designed for. So just for the public, could you give a rough estimate?
So in 23, the 1.5 million that we have programmed is about 1.5% of our total spending budget for 23. I do not have the line graph, and I can't open any files at this moment. So there was a line graph that I did for the Finance Committee that had a gap, the projected gap that would be in '24, and we would be filling that with the 4.9 million of ARPA funds, but there was a little bit left, and it may have been in the, I recall, it might be $5 million, and that would be maybe 5% of our budget, or a little bit less, presuming our budget grows from the 100 million that it currently is. So you're asking for that percentage, but without that, I can't give you the.
Just a rough idea, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, do you want to continue? Are we ready to move forward, everyone? Yep. I see it more in the 3% range, right?
Do you want us to start
Yes,
down
yes,
these
thank you.
one at a time? We'll start with number 1. It's sponsored by Mayor Buckley, and it adds a capital project in the CIP to put pickleball court lights at Truxton Park. And the funding source will be the Capital Reserve Fund. Well, that's an appropriate use for the Capital Reserve. The second one, also from Mayor Buckley, adds capital outlay funding to Pip Moyer for a boxing tent at the rec center using reserve for one-time funds.
Can I speak to both of those issues? So I think the budget for the lights is half that, but I want to point out to the council that the pickleball community are proposing to fund $10,000 to $20,000 of this amount, and then the lights will be designed so that they have credit card readers on them, so you won't be able to use the lights unless you pay for them. And then we will get not only revenue from the lights to pay off this investment, but we'll also be putting revenue, credit card readers on the tennis court lights as well, because that costs the city money when we run those lights. So we should be compensated for the cost, but we will charge an adequate amount to pay back the amount, and over time, of course. And then surplus revenue also from the tennis courts, which are currently not metered anyway. So that's one thing. And then on the boxing brigade idea, it's this thing that we've been working on for a while. We hope to actually have a permanent facility, a permanent fixed address for a police boxing brigade. We see this as a thing that is relevant for that missing group youth that we seem to lose after 14. So temporarily, we're proposing to put a tent next to the Pip Moyer Rec Centre, off next to the amphitheatre, with double doors off the running track. And there we have been given a lot of equipment from the US Naval Academy. We are also being given support from the US Naval Academy in terms of the boxing coach and the academy students who want to get involved in this program. So we will have a very exciting initiative starting at Pip Moyer, and this is kind of the cost of the tent to make that happen. And any of you guys, I've walked a few of you through the idea, but if any of you guys want to do a walkthrough with me at the Pip Moyer Rec Centre, I'd love to do that. Alderman Savage, yeah.
Yeah, just a question on that. So how long would you see this tent staying in place?
I think they'll get 2 seasons out of it. So, I've been trying to sort of do an annex at Woodside on their new recreation centre that's going to be built there. There's enough land to do that. So working with the police foundation and working to find funds for this initiative, that will take a year or 2 or whatever to move in that direction. But in the meantime, we'll start to build support for the program, start to get a connection between obviously the Police Athletics League and the community, and I think it's going to be a very exciting thing. So we've taken Archie, Director Simmons, other people from the team to the Mac Lewis boxing gym in Baltimore. It's changed many lives. We think it teaches a lot of values, sportsmanship and athleticism, all those sorts of things. It helps with conflict resolution. We truly believe that. So I think it's definitely worth us trying this idea.
When you say seasonally, do you mean just like spring, summer, or
yeah, so I think I haven't looked at the design of the tent, and I haven't looked at whether they can pump. In the summer, it will be open, and then they roll down the sides when they're locked down. But maybe we could get a multi-season out of it. But I'd say it's a 2-year.
So that would close that side of
they would own the tent.
Okay.
Alderman Pittendale Charles, sorry.
Mayor, Alderman Savage, I happened to be down at Rec and Parks today that the Naval Academy brought the equipment. It was very exciting. Mr. Moore was there to accept it. It was really, they didn't have any use for it, and then made the connection with Rec and Parks to bring that. They had the boxing, I think it was last fall, October, November, and I went down there to the boxing match. It was very well attended. People were excited. There were younger kids. It was honestly more exciting to watch than watching adults. But it's from what I've been told, it's a great way to bring discipline to children, to have a focus. And as you know, a part of all this Annapolis United is to bring kids as many experiences as possible. And this is just another part of that menu of activities that we want to bring to kids. Of course, everybody's not going into boxing, but it is something to keep the kids, instead of going toward violence, toward success. And a part of that will probably, I'm sure, be an educational component as well. So everything we can do to kind of heighten that, that's what we're trying to do.
And may I respond? Yeah, and I agree with you in terms of the merits and potential value. I guess I'm more just wondering about the logistics, how much space that's going to take up of the rec, because I know it's pretty busy there to begin with. So is that going to be taking off that whole side of the rec center?
Yeah, when you go in that workout room on the right-hand side, when you walk in, if you look through the glass to that grassed area next to it, there's a grassed outside area there. It has double doors that lead to the track. So you'd not only have the steps to use for training, sort of Rocky style, you'd also have the track. Police Chief Jackson always likes to point out that Muhammad Ali was introduced to boxing by a police officer. And so that will be a quote of that above the double doors as you go out from the track into the tented area. And the visual is going to be great to sort of come through and sort of see an Olympic class a boxing ring next to the rec center, which is an amazing rec center already, but it'll be quite a unique thing for us, I think. So, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the next, this was sponsored by Mayor Buckley and co-sponsored by Alderman Gay. It adds funding to the Transportation Fund for a free transit program. It actually would require funding from the general fund. So it's actually going from the general fund to the Transportation Fund, because there would be, in a free transit program, there would be a loss of revenues, both from fares and from the state employee payment that we get for the state employees to ride. That's $700,000. This is an example of one of the programs. How would you continue it if it was successful? Because that's a big chunk of funding. So that's $700,000. Do you want to speak to that?
I'll just point out that the Transportation Committee would like us to try pilot this. We believe that the money that's out there that's coming down federally will come to communities that are piloting different ideas as terms of mobility. But the onus will be on us Dewan and I or whoever else is involved in making sure that we pull down some funding to cover the shortfall here. I will do everything I can to keep the contract, if it's possible, for the state piece, because we run that route specifically for the state. I don't think we would particularly be running that route without the state demand. But I feel we can get to the state and find a way to do that. You know, there's still questions on whether if it's free for the public, it has to be free for the state employees as well. So that is the presentation that was given to us by the Transportation Committee. So, you know, 300 was a lot easier to swallow than 700. But I think really in terms of mobility, in terms of transportation, that the cities that moved in this direction saw a 30 to 40% increase in ridership. We think that as a country, we have to think of ways to popularize transportation. And as a world, we have to get people out of single-use vehicles, and we have to get them into shared-use mobility. If we are truly going to decarbonize, if we're truly going to move our cities away from fossil fuel. And so we know that the buses in this city and the county will be ultimately electric. The grants are in, and the grant applications are in on a city level and on a state level. We think we definitely have to sell this as a pilot, and the onus has to be on us to chase the funding afterwards to make sure that it can continue. Alderman Gay had his hand up first then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the Finance Director, am I correct in assuming that the reason the amendment I proposed for $300,000 fare-free transit was removed because of the impact of the $250,000 contract may have had on it?
No, this is one we chatted about yesterday, because the 300,000 was pre-pandemic numbers, and I think your intention was to for an entire year, which would be the 700,000.
Okay, yeah. So would the 300,000 not have been? Would the 300,000 cover the fare?
You're talking about the state folks.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So I think that's like 265 a year.
Okay.
So the 700 does include the state folk.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Oh, one more. I'm sorry. And because of the amendment for the $300,000 was in, I mean, would that still technically be that's an eligible amendment, correct? The funding, at least, the amount, $300,000? Would I be able to just amend my amendment?
So yeah, I mean, if you wanted, you're saying you want to put it back in?
For a different use?
Oh, for a different use? That would be a new amendment if it's for a different use.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Finlayson, then Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There has been much discussion in the community about free fares. And as a matter of fact, the Caucus of African American Leaders last month, or I guess this month, took a position in support of it. And Alderwoman O'Neill was at that meeting and spoke as the chair of our Transportation Committee. We have not, I believe, given our committee and our staff an opportunity to discuss this. The Transportation Committee, I think, that spoke, the community-led committee, they have their position. Dr. Dua sent information to me because I was presenting at the caucus that was contrary to some of the information that was being presented. And so I think we need to have a clear picture of both sides of this discussion. As you've heard me say, one of my major concerns is eliminating transit. And so we need to be expanding transit to those corners of the city to residents who now have no access. And so what does this do to the expansion to reach all residents in our city? So there are some questions, and I don't expect us to have the answers, But there are some questions that need to be answered before we take this leap. And as the city manager has said, once you put it out there, it's hard to take back. Now, 'tis true, we started with the circulator, it was free, then we charged $1, then it was free again. I don't know what it costs now, but we've gone round and round. But we're talking with the circulator, a very relatively small group of participants. Here, we're talking the whole city. So I think we need a lot more data on this and the implications of it before we can make a sound decision. That's my position. Thank you.
I just want to point out that if you come into the city from the county, it's free. But if you get on a bus in the city and go out of the city, it costs you. So, Alderman Savage, then Alderman Neal.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much we're supposed to be opining on these. We're just getting information. I know it's a good chance to kind of hear what our colleagues are thinking about some of these. But I do agree with a colleague from Ward 4 in a sense. I also feel like we're kind of putting the cart before the horse a bit here. If we pay for this, we kind of lose a lot of leverage we would have in terms of going to some of the businesses in the county and the county themselves in terms of trying to get them to help pay for this transit system if we just go ahead and make it free. Because I do think that, for example, the Annapolis Mall and some of the other employment centers should be pitched in to help pay for this. And I also think it's important for us to look to see how the Annapolis Go program fits in with all of our transit system. I mean, honestly, I think we should probably do a transit. I know it was mentioned for 2024 or 5, I think, for the transit department to do a whole transit assessment. I think it would really make sense, I think, to do that first instead of committing ourselves to this right away. I'm certainly open to the idea and want to get there, but I just feel like we need more of a plan.
Thank you, Alderman O'Neill, then Alderman Gay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I will say that ditto on both of my colleagues. As the chair of the Transportation Committee and as the person who has listened to both the report from the Transportation Commission and had a pretty extensive meeting with Dr. Dua about it, and we're always talking about how we need to respect the knowledge and the expertise of our directors. And our director really wants to do this study. I would move to push the study up into 2023 before I went ahead with this, because in the current report from the commission, the Transportation Commission, it doesn't change any routes. It doesn't add any routes. It doesn't alter the routes. And I think that that's really important for us to know when we're talking about equity and we're talking about getting more people on. If we're not changing the routes, do we know why people aren't riding now? There's been talk about some of the buses being 7 or 8 people a day, seeing that many people. That's crazy that is it free for those same 7 or 8 people, or will we see a double in that or a 40% increase in that because it's free? We don't have that idea yet. We don't know what the general public, why they're not riding or why they are riding. So I would actually support doing the study before we went ahead and decided that we were going to offer free transit. Thank you.
Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree with one thing that my colleagues have stated, and obviously it's just the equity piece in this project. And I think that the idea that we charge our most vulnerable citizens for transportations is not equitable at all. So there's your start. I've witnessed people scraping up change, pennies, to pay $2 to get on the bus to go to the Annapolis Mall so they can get to work. And then they don't have money to get back home, and so they're figuring out their whole shift. Well, how am I going to get home? I mean, that's equity. Obviously, the routes have to be changed, but that has nothing to do with a fare free transit project. Myself and Alderman Savage have proposed route changes previously while we discussed the electric bus process, and we were told that the state contracts that we received are what is making it so difficult for us to change the current routes. And I would 100% agree with you. That is a large portion of the reason why people aren't riding as well. If I live in Eastport and I have to get on the red, then get on the yellow, and then get on the brown to get wherever I'm going. I mean, like, who wants to do that? And so I completely agree with you. The one thing I would caution my colleague, as he was saying, we should see how these things tie into the Annapolis Go and mobility plans. I'm fearful of that for two reasons. One, that's all temporary. And two, we don't pay for that. And so to intertwine with that would be difficult. But I do agree with you. We should look at microtransit solutions. But I think that the two things can operate simultaneously, the fair free transit, while we look at existing studies to change routes. But that's just, my opinion.
Thank you. And Director Dickinson, is this process okay, or do you think we should?
Well, I can tell you we're very likely going to run out of time. But this is what this meeting was set up for, was to talk about all the amendments that are proposed and give you a chance to talk about why you did them. And then the formatting, we complete the formatting based on the discussion today, and we'll present them for hearing on the 6th.
And it is helpful, by the way, to hear everyone's opinion. Thank you. Alderman Pindell. Charles?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madam Chair, do you see any kind of middle ground between what Alderman Gay is saying and what we on the Transportation Committee have seen or discussed?
I do. I mean, I think that there's some possibilities if we're talking about offering free. I know that if you offer free for one, you're free for all. But maybe in the interim, there's some opportunities for us to use some of the funding to get tickets out there. I know I had a constituent call me and said they wanted a bus ticket, and I didn't know how to get them a bus ticket other than paying for their bus ticket, which obviously I couldn't do to every single time and every person. But, maybe there's an opportunity for us to run a pilot for maybe the people that are currently riding the bus, if that helps them, I'm open to brainstorming and coming up with, thinking outside the box for some of these options, more so than finding $700,000 this year and then having to find that and or more in following years using one-time funds.
Logistics is always the challenge. Who is, who isn't? How do you monitor that when someone is getting on the bus? I guess that's a Dr. Duwa concern, as far as if we were going to do that, how exactly, how it would look, what would it look like? Who are we talking about? So maybe that's a brainstorm between you, Alderman Gay, and Dr. Duwa and his team to kind of figure out what we can do over the next year to mitigate. I mean, I hate to see people getting on a bus trying to find the last penny to get to work. That's just, it's like seeing someone go through a trash can for food, almost. Not to that point, but it is kind of, it gets you in the gut. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jody?
I just wanted to say quickly on this is that I remember bringing this up last budget session because of sort of a different objective. It was to elevate our transit system. It just seems, obviously it is underutilized, and, it just has this, it's not like any other transit in any other city where you see people using it. So I know I introduced like a pilot. Let's just offer it for free. For just a definitive amount of time, even if it's like, Mayor Buckley's really good at this, let's do a 90-day pilot or something. And that, I'm just thinking out loud that still could be some sort of compromise while we are reevaluating the routes. And we are also keeping the money that Dr. Duwa is using to study the microtransit extensions. Maybe we're capable of doing all of that. But I just think it's sad how underutilized our transit system is, and I just feel like we need to. Because even just painting the circulator purple, more people are using it. It's just, that's all.
Thank you. Director
Ready?
Dickinson?
Okay. Amendment number 4 reallocates some funding within community grants. And if you recall, the Community Grants Committee did some shifting of funding after they discovered an application that was not addressed. And so they went through and moved some funding around. And the net change from this amendment is reducing the appropriation by $5,000 in total for Eastport United Methodist Church, because the city can't give funds directly to a church.
The reallocation was before we realized that there was a church in there. So the reallocation is and we're taking out the church funding of 5,000 because we can't.
So the total amount of community grants has been reduced from 346,000 to 341,000?
342 to 337.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's what I want to know. Overall reduction of
That's
$5,000.
correct. Yes.
I'm waiting for your hand to go up.
I do have a question, because in the past, we understand the difference between state and church, but we have given grants to churches in the past without any issues. So I'm not clear what has changed to have us in this position now.
Mr. City Attorney?
If you gave it in the past, those donations need to be reviewed, because you would be violating one of the principal tenets of government activity in the religious space, and that is to not favor religion or any one religion over another. So you'd have a constitutional issue if challenged. The fact that you did it and no one challenged it doesn't mean that you didn't have constitutional issues with the expenditure of those funds. Normally what happens with governments, in order to avoid the First Amendment violation, is to have these organizations create community development corporations that can be seated by people who are not necessarily all part of the church, but maybe part of the community. Because if you gave money, how would you know that the money was going to a non-religious activity?
Because they report back like every other recipient of community grants.
Well, but they have the government can't control what a church does, like it can with a 501c3 that has to create a corporation. Churches don't have to have any kind of corporate designation at all. They don't have to have any contact with the state. And the fact that they come and tell you we did something with the money doesn't make it auditable or true, as opposed to a 501c3 that has to generate reports to the IRS and to the state about how expenditures of charitable nature are expended.
Well, we have had, and no offense to you, Mr. Lyles, but we've had attorneys sitting in that seat for forever who have advised us on how we can expend city funds. And we have had things in place to make sure that the funds were not misappropriated and were accounted for. And so I contend that there is a way to support our local churches when they support us. And this is what this grant is about, as will be the next one that I'm to speak to, because they're going to provide us with the service that we cannot provide. And there is an accountability piece so that we know that it is appropriately funding. And I don't, surely churches have to have a 501c3 status or a whatever their 50.
But they don't.
Well, they have a certain state status.
They don't have to.
My church has to have,
They
because
do-
we just went through this because they wanted to
Okay.
add a daycare. So, I'm just saying, there is a way, if we choose to speak to this, and I would contend, and I would hope my colleagues would, have us look into this to see how we can do this. Because they are an integral part of our community. We need the services they provide.
I was going to give an example of, I was just asking Katie when the last one was on the list, and there's one, for instance, Heritage Baptist Church, but that's under their program, Backpack Buddies, and Backpack Buddies is a separate 501c3 organization that we give to for the program, not directly to the church. So I think the issue is giving directly to the church. And so when if they form those organizations to do a particular purpose and get their qualified status from the federal government, then that's the process we'd want them to go through.
And I understand that, and that was in my ward for a lot of years, and I was very supportive. So, okay, well, I think we need to look more closely at it, because I think there is a way for us to support the organizations that support us, the faith-based organizations.
Alderman Annette?
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It seems to me two different things going on here. I'm actually pretty sure the city attorney is correct, but I think how we've handled it with other church organizations is we're not giving it to the church directly, we're giving it to a program. And I guess I would hope we could go back to Eastport United Methodist and say, do you have a 501c3 or some other program that is not specific to the church? That's one resolution. The other resolution, though, is I'd hate to see us take even more money out of the community grant. So if we're not going to be giving this money to the Eastport United Methodist, and I do hope we can find a way to give it to some group associated with the church, I would hate to make it go away. Can't we go back and reallocate this? The community grant fund money is so much smaller than it was when Alderwoman Finlayson and I started on the council. It was 800,000, and we're down to 200 and something. So again, when we come to vote on this, I would prefer to return this to the community grant fund for reallocation rather than make it go away. But is anyone, can anyone talk to the church to find out if they have an ancillary 501c3 program? Or maybe I think Alderman Gay was trying to whisper to me that they might, or they're starting one. And if they have that separate organization, that's not the church, it's an activity, Mr. City Attorney, will we then be okay? Because I understand your point about separation of churches.
You can do what you want.
So we'll leave that to you. Alderman Finlayson and Director Dickinson had some clarification.
Yes, I will add that you will see later, there are some proposals for other grants. In addition, if the council accepted this amendment and passed it, and then you wanted to do another amendment that would do the same thing, reduce it and add it back to another organization, but it would have to be stipulated in that amendment. So if you're going to give it to a different organization, you can create an amendment that would take it from the one and give it to the other.
Thank you. Pendell Charles?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Gay, is your contact information, Ms. Snyder, over at Eastport United? Okay. Say that again, as well as the pastor? Okay.
Thank you. Director Dickinson?
They're starting the process, and if you read the report, this was not for actual programming, this was for staffing. And so that we aren't affecting any of their programming, they still will operate the programming. This was just for staffing salaries, so I think they are going to make the adjustments.
Okay.
Okay, and Katie has pointed out to me that there is an amendment deadline, so I'm saying about drafting amendments, but the council would have to consider if they wanted to, if there is another amendment in addition to this list of amendments, the council has to agree to consider those. But we can address that later. The next one is Amendment 5, Alderwoman Finlayson. It adds funding to the Office of Community Services for challenged communities using the reserve for one-time funds.
I'll speak to it if you like. You each have a letter from me that's not signed. I do apologize. I dictated it in and then I forgot to put my name on it. But it begins with "Dear colleagues," and I'm going to read this third paragraph to you because I thought it was pretty good, so I want you to hear it. The request number 5 for $200,000 stems from an urgent need to help our communities that seem to have the greatest violence. While the police are implementing a community policing model, they cannot be everywhere all the time. An approach that we have successfully used in the past has been to ask local organizations to adopt a community. While that has worked reasonably well, there has not been a consistency in some of the organizations. This funding is to be used solely to give small grants of $20,000 or $25,000 to community organizations, including faith-based groups, and I'll fight that battle, and fraternities and sororities. Their commitment for this grant will be a year to adopt a specific community. Their commitment will be to a specific community with whom they will work on an ongoing basis. They will get to know all the residents in the community and become part of the community. They will be asked to assist the residents in a litany of ways, including providing connections to resources. We cannot be everywhere, but this program allows us to put potentially hundreds of eyes and ears into the 6 or 7 communities that are most at risk for violence. I have spoken not only to faith-based community, but to other community organizations about their willingness to participate. They have all agreed that they would be willing to help us. This funding is to be used for city organizations that can demonstrate their ability to accomplish the goals we set. I've met with the staff of our Office of Community Caring, and they are elated to handle this program. This is not an original thought, however. Reverend Colbert, whom you recognized on Monday night at the council meeting, was the impetus behind this request. He sent a letter to me and to the mayor 10 months ago. He has worked in the Bay Ridge Gardens community for many years and wants to continue to do so, but needs just a little bit of help from the city. This funding will give his organization and others that little bit of help they need. I envision that the leadership of these organizations will meet regularly and share successes and areas of need, which can be provided to our staff. This will include quarterly reports data. The group will give our Office of Community Caring boots on the ground to help them reach those in need. While we are all still reeling from the tragedy in Texas, we have had our own tragedies in very different ways. Our hearts bleed for the parents of those 19 children and the loved ones of those 2 teachers. A similar group of mothers exists in our city. They are the mothers who have lost their sons and daughters to gun violence. That group of weeping mothers would also be eligible for a small grant to help them share their stories. It is their hope and mine that their stories will reach other mothers and grandmothers and fathers and relatives who want to avoid seeing the same thing happen in their communities. The target of this funding is primarily for community groups who can help us stem the tide of violence in our communities. This is a service that community groups can provide. While we need it, we don't have the manpower to accomplish it. This funding will go a long way to help community groups help us. And again, I will reiterate that this is using one-time funding, And if we see that there's value and success in this program, then it will be up to us to continue it. And if not, we do not. Thank you.
So just want to point out that we're over halfway into our 3 hours, and we're at number 5. Better
than usual.
Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as I always do, every time someone mentions the time in a work session, I'll point out when will we otherwise discuss it, unless on the 6th we really do plan on being in here for 10 hours to go through these all over again. My first question, do churches still take tithes? What happened to that? I remember when churches used to collect tithes every Sunday and they would, use that funding for the community. This is my question for the Alderwoman is the redundancy I'm seeing in this, and I just would like a little clarification. For example, I spoke to Alderwoman Pendell Charles previously before the before the community grants deadline about the alphas applying for the community grant, but they couldn't work it out. It seems that what you're essentially doing is taking one-time use funding and allowing nonprofit organizations to use it that should have applied for community grants. And I'm not being accusatory. I'm asking the question: is there redundancy in what they could have applied for in the community grants, and them now doing essentially what the Office of Community Caring would do, and also what the Cure Violence / No Harm VIP program would do?
Well, your first question, I don't believe it's redundancy, first of all. And the idea, as I mentioned, came from Jerry Colbert some months ago, because he had been working in Bay Ridge Gardens, in your very community, and needed some help in helping to address the violence in that community. Their church cannot do it alone. And if you know anything about John Wesley, it's a very small congregation, but they are very diligent in your ward in trying to help that community. But they need a little bit of help from the city as they're helping us. Secondly, community, what was your second question? You had 3 questions, I'm sorry.
Well, I guess you just really answered it. In one, I asked, shouldn't they have applied for the community grants? I mean, I don't have any problem with it. Like you said, they're helping. I think it is, they are redundant. Particularly, you mentioned them pairing residents with community services. That's exactly why we started an entire Office of Community Services. And then on top of that, we do have the No Harm VIP program operating, as well as the, oh gosh, now I'm blanking, and I know my programs. Not the VIP, but the Naptown Anti-Dope. So what would they be doing that's kind of outside of the box? Would they be almost like chaperoning the community, or?
Well, I'll be more specific. My hope is that they will be constant forces, and forces isn't a good word, constant members of the community. They will actually get to know everybody in the community and be able to keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on. So when things start to stir, they may be able to stem whatever is coming. I spoke to the Office of Community Caring, the 2 ladies there, and, as a sponsor of that committee, as a sponsor of that office, I know already that we have given them larger responsibilities than 2 people can handle. And the original intent was to create a full office with multiple people working there, 6, okay, who would still be taxed to do all that they do. And we have 2 people and a third. We have 3 people there. But they can't handle it all. And so why not create a group, a cadre of community people who are willing to help us in this capacity? Now, you mentioned the other 2 organizations. If we saw data that would support the success of those programs, then maybe we could speak to duplication of services. But right now, we haven't seen any data, and we haven't seen any successes that will indicate that we shouldn't continue those programs. So help me out with that. Where is the data that would show that what I'm proposing is already being done?
I thought you were pleased with the presentation you received in finance. To my knowledge, maybe not.
No.
But I don't have any, again, this is just my opinion. I thought it was a duplication of funds, but thank you for the explanation.
Thank you for asking.
Anyone else? Alderman Savage.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea, but it does seem like it'd be more appropriate to have it be just put this money in a community grant program, because I think that oversight because presumably the council set up that community grant program like they did for a reason in the past, in terms of having staff review it and having it being out of the council. Because I guess in this case you're saying that the Office of Community Caring would be the one reviewing the grant applications, right? Mm-hmm. And so presumably they would follow a similar process.
And Ms. Lee was the one who managed our community grants this year, so she is very familiar with. And you know, this came about, as I mentioned, Reverend Colbert sent us something last summer because of the violence erupting in Bay Ridge Gardens. And then again, something else happened. I don't recall what the incident was in January, February, which is when I thought we need to tap into some resources in the community, because we had situations, and particularly gun violence, popping up in several of our communities. And I've specifically said 6 or 7 communities, which are our hotspots. So that was the impetus behind the timing. You know, in future years, absolutely put this under community grants. I'm not wedded to where it is. I'm wedded to what it is and the successes that it can meet.
Okay.
So,
excuse me. The other concern is just along the lines of what the city attorney had to say, just preserving the separation of church and state, and making sure, you know, I think making sure whoever applies would need to apply with nonprofit status or an arm, because.
And I have no problem addressing, asking them if Heritage has a way to do it, then maybe the others have a way to do it also.
Thank you. Director Dickinson?
Okay, ready to move on? The number 6 is from Alderwoman Tierney. It adds funding to the Sprinkler Assistance Fund using the reserve for one-time funds. It's $52,000, and I will let her.
Okay, these are not in order of priority. On sprinklers, after we all passed the ordinance, thank you very much for allowing 5 years to sprinkle the buildings on Main Street in Francis. We met with several businesses to ask them how this will be successful. And the result of that meeting was that the loan amounts it would be helpful if the loan amounts were more. And so what this is basically math, increasing the revolving fund to $400,000. It's presently $342, and I probably didn't do that math correctly, but there's about 40 plus properties to be sprinkled. We don't expect them all to come in at once, but we want to be able to average 10 a year or so, and this would allow us to increase that loan value to $40,000 and get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Annette?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am a big fan of the sprinkler fund, and I know we're not supposed to use this word. Isn't it a revolving fund? Isn't the money that goes in there replenished by people paying off their loan?
Correct.
So I guess this is a question of scale. Whatever the amount is now, 342,000 or 58, whatever the number, do we really need to make it go up to 400,000? Because won't people be, after they borrow, be paying back into this fund? And I guess the real concern is, should we be parking $400,000? Is that the most efficient way to do our budget? rather than have amount of money that's lower and then people can take the loans and then pay back in and replenish the fund.
So this fund had some seed money from several years ago, and since I've been here, I've only made 3 loans. And so that activity coming in the door and the revolving nature of it is small. And if you see that, when you look at the 23 budget, I built in only the 3 loans that I know, which is it's $348,000 going into next year, and we assume $8,000 coming in. Now we've just now made a fairly significant loan today that we're cutting the check for today, so that will add to that, and then appropriating the whole amount. Now we don't know how fast these applications are going to come in. That's the thing. If all of them applied in the early couple years in this time frame, we could easily tap out that funding before the repayments replenish the fund. So it just depends on how much they ask for and how quickly the applications come in.
Thank you. Alderman Tierney wants to respond, and Alderman Pindell-Charles.
Oh, I just wanted to say exactly to your point, Alderman Arnett, it is a revolving fund. However, it hasn't been replenished, so it's sort of a jump start, if you will, to have that feed money. And ideally, then as we go along, it will be replenishing. So that's why this time it's a one-time expense. Thank you.
Alderman Pindell-Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madam Deputy Clerk, can you add me as a co-sponsor for that, or is that appropriate this time? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Dickinson.
Okay, we'll move on to number 7. This is from Alderman Gay. Adds funding to the city manager's office for a youth summer job program using the reserve for one-time funds.
Thank you very much. I want to make a couple of corrections. It should be adding all of my funding, well, not all, but as we walk through, I'd like to put this in the mayor's office under Mr. Rao. He managed it well in 2019, and I anticipate that he'll manage it again this time around. I also had issue, but we can discuss offline, with the amount. I had originally had an amount much higher, but finally shifted that, but we'll discuss it offline.
I can answer. You had $1 million.
Yeah.
And then we talked about the legality of the second half.
I was expecting to keep it on because of the ages associated with the task, but we can discuss that.
Sure.
Yeah. Just because as I'll now dive into this, we did a summer jobs program 2 years ago, just before COVID-19. It allowed each department to have as many interns as they please, as many students that applied. And I think we had about 60. It was very, very well attended. They met here in the first day. We'll had them paired up based on their interests. We had people in the Office of Law, etc. And so I expect to run that again. They were paid, they were compensated. That's why the amount is there, and I think they should be, because at the core of all of our criminal activity is poverty and economic injustice. And so this is an idea for our youth. We had it separated ages 14 through 18, and then 18 up. 18 up, obviously, college students, they're able to handle much more significant tasks. And they were also paid on a different scale. 14 through 18 are in a 5-week program. And at the end of the 5 weeks, they'll get $2,000 as a part of their interning with different offices within the city, and as well as sitting through courses for financial literacy, etc. 18 and up, which would be our college students and grads, are eligible for up to 60 hours of work week at $20 an hour. And that's how we broke that down. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Alderman Savage.
Yeah, I'm just curious, how many positions would this fund?
As it stands, as the amendment currently stands, is based off of the number of applicants who apply. So I had it for 118 through, or 18 and up, and then 114 through 18. Obviously, like I said, you don't get the full 100. And so as I've discussed with finance, and I put a little note on my amendment, any funds that are not used, I expect them to go back to the general fund.
And
Is that not possible?
So
Okay, yeah.
these funds would be,
Okay.
yeah, it would remain in the one time if we didn't use it for the
Awesome, thank you.
program.
And what local businesses would this be?
So
Or is that to be determined?
the local businesses, and thanks to the Office of Law, that actually was not, they found that it was not, I don't want to say it wasn't illegal, because it wasn't, but it just wasn't legally sufficient for our program. I originally had in the amendment that we could partner with local businesses, copying how Orlando does their teen business program. But we ran into some issues, and so I just figured best to remove it and focus on applying aid to city services.
And I guess presumably these amendments, as they get developed, will have some kind of fiscal impact. I mean, besides this, because programs like this, I think, are going to take staff time, because we mentioned earlier about problems getting some of the amendments implemented. So are we going to be able to get an idea of if staff has the capacity, if there's going to be a financial impact on them to do some of these programs?
So we haven't in the past developed fiscal impact analysis for each individual amendment. Mainly we stick to what we were using here. You're right, that takes bandwidth. It's one of the issues that I talked about earlier. When you throw a lot of programs and money at a department, do they have enough capacity to handle it? Not sure how to quantify that. And I don't know if you'd want some kind of input on that topic when you hear the amendments. David, you want to?
No, it's a great point. It does take a lot of staff time for these programs, because they all have to be overseen. It sounds like William Rowell handled this, and I'm not sure how many positions, but I remember that program, and they had a great manager for that. So, but it does take staff time to conduct these.
Because it just seems, I mean, I think it's a good idea, but it just sounds like a lot of, I don't know how this compares to the last program, but that sounds like a lot of applicants and potentially time to figure out where they're going to go, and just something to look into as this gets developed.
Finlayson?
Yes, thank you. We have had summer jobs programs in the city before, an Annapolis Youth Summer Jobs Program, actually. And I asked each department to hire our high school kids for the summer, and they did. So and I see Ms. Hopkins. If you'd like, because you helped facilitate that program. We had to disband because of COVID, but we have a few of the employees that are still with us. FJ? EJ. That's what I was trying to.
EJ was one of our summer youth that worked in human resources, and we were able to hire later. What's worked well for us in the past is to kind of define a need, like what, working with Alderwoman Finlayson in the past, what we've done is reached out to the departments, say, do you have meaningful work for summer youth? Can we match you with someone? And we actually went through a pretty sophisticated matching program. So we look at the skill sets, they get to interview and really shine in terms of showing their initiative and their interest, but it's helpful when we have a setup so that we know what we're receiving, and that those folks, as I said before, that the young persons have meaningful work. And so we come up with a job description, we come up with who they're assigned to for mentoring and for development. And I think, honestly, the impact is not significant in terms of additional costs, because those individuals are, well, they were in this case because we were looking at departments to come up with the funds to be able to bring them on board. But it's more in numbers, logistically, can we give them a place to sit, give them, resources in terms of at the location so that they are integrated into the workplace well. And when you don't have somebody who's dedicating some time at the department level to give those individuals a chance to develop some skills, to be able to bring their skill, because it's not all development. Some of they actually bring some good stuff to you that you end up utilizing, like we did in EJ's case. So it's nice when you can do both, that you're receiving and that you're giving at the same time. I hope that helped.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Just want to add a context.
Thank you, Director Dickinson.
Okay, we'll move on to number 8, which is Alderman Gay adds funding to transportation for marketing and advertising using the reserve for one-time funds.
Very self-explanatory. We've discussed our transportation issues earlier today as it relates to route accessibility, communications on closures, updates to the line, fees, etc. And so this simply would allow the transportation department to have access to funding for marketing purposes. I anticipated, or I planned on submitting this last year, but I wasn't able to do so. The department hasn't had a marketing budget since the 2018 fiscal year, and so I discussed that at the time. It was Director Johnson, I think. I'm sorry? Gordon. I'm sorry, Rick Gordon. Yeah. Director Gordon, and we had put this together. So yeah, just for marketing to update our general public.
Thank you. Alderman Tierney?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm really excited about that, because won't that include, like, for example, on buses themselves, maybe showing their routes and that kind of thing? Yeah, okay, good, great. Not painting all the buses purple, but thanks.
Thank you. Director Dickinson?
Yep. On to number 9, Alderman Gay adding funding to the mayor's office for a grant to Haca for improvements to outdoor recreation spaces using the reserve for one-time funds.
Thank you. I had originally spoke with the director as it relates to improvements to the swimming facility. She was opposed to it, just due to a number of other issues that they have going on at the property. And I said, well, we got to put something together for improved recreation, including benches, park, little stuff like that. I've had a number of constituents reach out about the quality of the playground equipment. I'm not sure if the last time any of you been through Eastport Terrace, Harborhood, or Robinwood. The playground equipment needs assistance. They need a little TLC, and so this is the hope of that amendment in grant form. And I put it in the grant form because I wanted to be sure that we're not doing anything that we had not previously done for any other housing facilities within our communities to stay clear of any legal troubles. So that's the genesis of that amendment.
Thank you. Director Dickinson?
Number 10, Alderman Gay adds funding to the mayor's office for Naptown Universal Basic Income Pilot using ARPA funding.
Alderman Gay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I had previously introduced this amendment on a much larger scale. After a year of being able to see other cities implement the program, I came back with this approach, again, using the American Rescue Plan Act funding, because that is how 99% of the municipalities across the country are running their whatever you call it, UBI or personal income programs. The hope with this program, as opposed to some of our neighboring jurisdictions, you must be qualified to apply for the Universal Basic Income Program here in Annapolis. And I think the reason I added that to the amendment is because there are problems where people are just short, $400 or $500 a month, and being able to, especially with gas, medical expenses, food, insurance, etc. And with the effects of COVID, and the inflation that we're seeing across the country, I think this is the perfect time to pilot this program. I sent to you all 2 years ago, except for Karma. I'll make sure I catch you up. Alderwoman O'Neill, my apologies. I'll catch you up on the Stockton report. It's titled Seed, out of Stockton, California, where the program was extremely successful in its first year. And the implementation was done in a way that the city was able to then go back and monitor and look at what the participants have spent their funds on. And more often than not, you found out that, like I said, it was for those things: food, medical expenses, transportation. Actually, less than 2% of the time, the recipients spent it on drugs or alcohol. And so these are for people who just legitimately need the extra leg to make it through the month and the year. It's a year-long pilot program. It'll be $500 a month for 100 families. The families would have to apply through the mayor's office. Again, I was putting this under Will's office. And we would come up with income eligibility requirements, obviously working with Teresa, and fully flesh the program out. Is included in the $800,000 is $300,000 for operation and contracting expenses, because we want to bring in the experts to be able to help manage this program and get it off the ground, as well as help point us in the direction for funding opportunities in the next year. I'll say this right now: I do not anticipate using one-time funds or American Rescue Plan funds to continue the program in the next year. I legitimately will go after both state and federal dollars to make sure that we can continue the program, as well as outside dollars. I've even had constituents from my colleague from Wards 8 reach out who'd be willing to help finance the program, as they've done in Stockton and other municipalities where the finances are raised just from the general public. And so there are a number of opportunities that we can take with this, but that's, again, the thought behind this amendment.
Alderman Annette was first, and Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As my colleagues and you might suspect, I'm not a big fan of any of these spending increases, but this is one that has caught my attention. Not only is it the case in Stockton that there was very little questionable use, the thing that struck me is that in Stockton, a quarter of the money was spent for food, kind of a basic necessity. But another portion of it was used for purchasing transportation and for being able to take time off to look for a new job. And it really did, by the reports, dramatically change the lives of the people in the program. I've been talking to a lot of the gubernatorial candidates, and they're all talking about narrowing the income gap. And offline, because I don't want to embarrass them, I've asked them, how do you do that? How are you planning on doing it? This is a way, this is a bottom-up way of giving people a chance to escape their circumstances. And I do hope we can find private foundation help for this as well. But if we're ever going to walk instead of talk about taking some actions to get equality and equity in the system, it seems to me that it's programs like this that we have to give serious thought to. I know it's a big chunk of money. I hope it's not one time only, because I think once you start a program like this, you need to see it through for the 2-year life, but also this is only 100 people or so, and we've got thousands out there that really need this kind of help. So I am an advocate. I do support Alderman Gay on considering this program. I do think that we need to put the horse before the cart, and we really need to have a more defined program before we put money in it. This is which comes first, the chicken or the egg, but I think we can get a program, and we can get it pretty quickly. Teresa Wellman may or may not be the right person. She's awfully busy with all of her regular duties, and maybe this is something that when we have 6 people in the Office of Community Caring, we can have somebody administering there. But this is a program that I find exciting, and more than exciting, I think that it's something we have to examine our conscience on and ask ourselves, how are we going to close this horrible and growing income disparity gap? And I see this as a way.
Thank you, Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I entirely agree with this program. I think we need to be moving in this direction as a society. I do have a couple of buts attached to that. It is a lot of money, and one thing I'm concerned about is who's going to manage this. We're now having the mayor's office potentially deal with 200, potentially up to 200 person employee employment program, and running a 100 person program for this universal basic income. And I think it'd be better served perhaps to scale back both those programs to make them more manageable. Because I know Baltimore City is doing a trial program for this as well, but they have partnered with a nonprofit to actually do a lot of the management. And I'm guessing, are you thinking just in having all this managed by the mayor's office, or is there a nonprofit you've spoken to who could help?
As I stated previously, I think it'd be in the best interest to bring in a nonprofit or a professional experience in programs like this, and that's the reason the $300,000 is included in the amendment.
Okay. Well, I feel like maybe it'd be best to have that lined up first, though, in terms of figuring out who exactly is going to run it, to make sure it is set up for success. And I don't know, with Baltimore, when does that get kicked off? Do you know?
The application process is already underway. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they selected their first families a couple weeks ago.
Okay. It's going to be busy in the mayor's office.
It's good, because I'm just learning about this. It's great. Alderman Pendle-Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Gay, is there a financial literacy component attached to this? I could have missed it.
Alderwoman Pendle-Charles, I think that is a fantastic question, and that's at the core, again, of bringing in a professional. We won't be able to compile all the data. We won't be able to do the cards and the banks and all that stuff. That we really would need a program manager to come in. And the reason, as I shared with the alderman from Ward 8, it was tough to get the programming set up without the financing. People want to know that they're going to be compensated, and so I had to put the amendment in so that we could go through the proper process of working out of the city manager's office and putting out a bid for a contract.
Okay, because that's extremely important. I mean, I don't care who the persons are, but everybody could use some help from the financial literacy side of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Finlayson.
So what I'm hearing, Alderman Gay, is that we need a pilot where you have an opportunity to evaluate the program and look at how it would be implemented here. So what would it cost to do a first-year pilot program?
Well, I think that it will be discovered once we bring in the professionals. What I put here is very loosely the cost of the actual financing the stipends, and then a small percentage for the contracting services. And again, if we have to scale it back, I'm totally fine with that. But I won't know what it would need to be done until we bring in professionals in regards to the operation and managing of the program. And so the cost could balloon, but I did reach out actually on. Sorry, just give me 1 second, my apologies.
Well, while you're looking it up, you mentioned that you had visited other cities, I believe. So do they have a kind of an outline of how they went about implementing such a program? first year, second year,
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up. I should have had it more prepared. But that's how I found out about the two managing or program managers that are doing those two programs. Obviously, the one that was running the Stockton report or the SEED report, and then the group that's running the Baltimore nonprofit. And I did send communications to them at the early beginning of April, just to, again, talk about financing and see what it would take to run a program like that here.
I think it might be helpful if you could provide us with the first year costs, the second year costs, by the next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Tierney.
Yeah, real quickly, Alderwoman Pendle Charles mentioned literacy, but Alderman Gay, hello, Tuan, Alderman Gay, I know it's sort of a work in progress, is there an education component, a school component, that kind of thing, education, related to literacy and all that? What is the component included for that kind of stuff? Or do we know yet, or can we?
Are you referring to for the actual applicant to go through some sort of?
Well, is there any incentive for schools or anything like that? I was just,
I'm kind of confused on the question.
So it's income only. But then Alderwoman Pendle Charles mentioned, is there a literacy program? And so it triggered me to ask, is there any other education opportunities kind of stuff that could be looked at?
I can get that answer for you as well, yeah.
You know what I mean? Okay, cool, thank you.
And I just want to go to Mr. City Manager. So what is the next moment we'll be able to go through these? Because we're not going to get through this page probably till 4 o'clock.
Well, we have the council meeting scheduled on June 6th, the all-day meeting that will involve discussing these again and voting on them. So we were hoping to discuss some of them today, so it would shorten or at least allow us to finish on the 6th. I know we have all day, but there's obviously a lot of discussions that are needed for these amendments. So that's the next step is June 6th, full council meeting.
All right, thank you. Director Dickinson?
There's also a lot of time needed on June 6th to accumulate the past amendments and put all the numbers together and bring forth a balancing amendment if necessary. So, remember we break, we pass some amendments and we go and we break and we analyze. Yeah, and we can do the balancing amendment on the 10th, but there's still, we're doing follow-up and calculating and stuff, so there may be time for Katie and I to do some calculations and spreadsheets.
Thank you. Alderman Pendle Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I normally don't agree with Alderman Gay, but but I'm willing to go as far as we can go on this today. I think we will sign 2 to 5 p.m. I think for me, I can only speak for me, this is extremely important to get through these, but I know other people have commitments, I'm sure. But as far as we can take this, I'm willing to take it. Am I correct? We schedule between 2 and 5 today?
Yes.
Okay. But I'm just speaking for myself. And I guess Alderman Gay too. And Alderman Savage.
I think we all agree on the importance, but I'm sure other people have commitments after 5. So,
Just real quickly.
Alderman Tierney.
Yeah, just real quickly, maybe, and I'm guilty as charged, but maybe today, for today's purposes, that we explain what the it is, and if there's any clarification questions. I know I've been guilty of inserting my opinion or my thoughts, but if we just limit it to, do you understand this, what this is for, and any sort of clarification questions, maybe it'll go a little bit quicker? No?
Yeah, maybe we could move a little faster if everybody doesn't comment. Director Dickinson.
All right, we'll move on. The next one is Alderman Gay, moving funding from the City Dock Resilience and Revitalization Capital Project to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for Housing Assistance and Redevelopment. We have one concern here, and that the capital project will need another revenue source to fill that if you take some of the concession payment and take it out of that project and move it somewhere else. So that's something we'd have to solve if this amendment passes.
Thank you very much. And that's all fine and dandy, but they were going to have to solve that regardless, because when we sat in this council chamber, it was said that the concession payment could be used to help our communities. It was quickly put in the back of the budget book. You know, they said they didn't have an actual figure for it. That's fine by me. If it changes from 22 million to 19 million, or if it changes from 22 million to 30 million, I'm still going to have this amendment in for $1 million to be put to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, because it's needed. We all know the troubles and difficulties we face with affordable housing in the city of Annapolis. Our trust funds don't have the capacity to keep up with demand. I worked very closely with our state delegation in the two fiscal years ago, when we put 3% of the hotel and entertainment tax into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That's got us, I think, Jody, if you could, if I'm not mistaken, it's about, or Director Dickinson, it's about 200,000 and some change currently.
Okay, so hold on, let me find currently in the fund, coming into.
That's on the rental side, not the.
So remember, up through 21, the money left in the fund was all rental related. And if you look at the 21 fund balance, 763,000, and that's money that Teresa Wellman has been using to run some of her programs for those purposes that you just stated. And then we have additions coming in 22. Some of that is the occupancy tax. But, you know, we're talking at least 700,000, a few hundred thousand in there already.
And again, this can be used for the commitment we made to the General Assembly is that the 3% would be used for rental assistance or energy assistance. And the language for that is being worked on right now by myself, Joel Braithwaite from the Office of the Law, and Teresa Wellman. And then there's also what was the Housing Affordability Trust Fund that can be used for constructions, repairs, land purchasing, home purchase, et cetera, for encouraging the mission of housing affordability. So that was the background behind that amendment. I really would urge my colleagues to keep in mind that a commitment that was made several times throughout that entire process, that the concession payment money could be used for outside projects. There was no commitment in that contract, or no commitment made in this room, that every single dollar from the concession payment had to be put toward the city dock project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager?
Yeah, I would just say that this is probably a premature discussion, because when we actually get that money, we will have to bring it to the council to appropriate, and at that time, you all will decide how it's going to be used. So if we could just hold on to this and table it, and then have that discussion when we're appropriating that money, when we actually receive it, I think that would be the appropriate time.
Thank you, Alderman Gay.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to see the amendment go through, fail or pass, because there needs to be a paper trail of efforts to get this done. Because like I said, it was switched up really quickly and put in the back of the book. And if I would have never went through capital projects, I go through the whole budget book, every budget, but if I would have never went through, I would have never known they were putting the concession payment money back there. And it would have been voted on and passed. And so I'd like to see this amendment fail or pass, go through all the way. I appreciate the concern though from the city manager's office, and I've talked to him about it, and I'm not trying to be, an ass about this, but I just think it's important that we follow through on that commitment.
Thank you, Alderman Savage, then Alderman Arnett.
I think one way to accomplish, is I support where you're going with this, but I think a better way to do perhaps might be to, and let me know if this is a bad idea, city manager, but if we maybe amend the capital improvement project text to say that a portion of the concession will go to affordable housing, and because basically that'll allow us to and maybe even say something along the lines of the final amount will be determined by the council, but that kind of addresses his concern to make sure that a portion of it will go to that without committing until we actually, because it's hard to commit on a number until we actually know what the concession will be, right? I think, is that what you're essentially saying?
Well, we don't know the amount. We don't know the need right now for city dock because we're actively pursuing other funding. I'm confident that we're going to get federal money for the project too. So, and hope is not a strategy, but hopefully we would be able to use some of the concession, wouldn't need it because it's displaced by the federal funding. But that is all kind of up in the air. And in order to keep moving the project forward, we need a funding source. So right now it's the concession agreement.
Thank you, Alderman Annette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was happy to hear Alderman Gay mention that he's working with the Office of Law and the Planning Department, because last I knew, there isn't really an established affordable housing fund, nor rules about how the money goes out of that fund. So I think hopefully soon, before we drop more money in there, we ought to know what the fund is and how it's used, who's responsible for it, what are the eligibilities, all of those things. So I look forward to hearing those legislative changes.
Thank you, Alderman Pendell Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Gay, I'm sure you've thought of this, but if not, I'm looking at your Naptown Universal Basic Income pilot. We talked about the different phases of it. Possibly when we start to look at your housing program, most of those families may be able to take advantage of this housing opportunity. So that might be a part of your basic income pilot program. That would be a continuation and probably a nice transition. And that financial literacy piece would be extremely, how do you save, as a homeowner, what do you need to do and that sort of thing. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Dickinson.
Are we moving on?
Next one, move on, yeah.
Okay. Number 12, Alderman Gay adds funding to the Office of Community Services to assist with emergency shelter needs using the reserve for one-time funds.
Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Mr. This is my last amendment. I know people are like, what the hell, this kid? No, this is my last one for a while. Obviously, look, we go through, and I'll invite Erin to come up if she'd like to speak on it. You don't have to, but there are so many times where residents call, they've just been evicted, they may be in a domestic dispute situation, whatever. I mean, I've had residents' toilet fall through the ceiling in the middle of the night. I mean, just so many things. And we have to go through the county to provide services for homelessness. They are often at capacity because homelessness is just rampant in Anne Arundel right now. And so this would just allow the Office of Community Services to utilize these funds to meet the needs of Annapolis residents expeditiously, because, it's difficult when you have, a mom with 2 kids who just got evicted in the middle of December and they're saying, oh, well, the only shelter we have is available Wednesday and it's Monday. And it's like, well, what does she do for 2 nights, And so this would be used for circumstances as such.
Thank you. Director Dickinson.
The next is Amendment 13 from Alderman Chandlemeyer. It adds funding to planning and zoning for an economic analysis using the reserve for one-time funds, and I believe this is for a study on land use in the city and how are we making the best use of our land.
Okay, we can move on because Chandlemeyer's not here. No.
Is that the economic gardening? That's not it? Okay.
No, we appropriated money for that this year. And this is for something new about studying whether or not the city is making the best and most appropriate use of its land.
And you'll note that his name is not on many things. All right.
All right, the next.
Still a place.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to give a little more explanation to that. My understanding is that the study is to first look at revenues generated by properties in the city and then also look at the cost incurred, by the city to provide services and infrastructure, and then compare basically in terms of land use patterns and patterns of development, which properties are, what the revenues are compared to the cost to the city. So that's how it relates to land use and planning.
Thank you. Alderman Savage?
Thank you, Mr. LaPlace.
So is this something that would be done by planning and zoning staff?
I believe a consultant would be, it's a consulting
okay.
service. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next one is Amendment 14. It was added by the Finance Committee. It increases the funding for the Substance Abuse Disorder Program within OEM using the reserve for one-time funds, $70,000.
Okay. Alderman Finlayson or Alderman O'Neill, chime in if I don't have the, if you don't have similar notes, but this was as a result of the Office of Emergency Management presentation of their performance measures and their goals, and one of their more substantial goals is to continue their work on opioid prevention, which they have been very successful in reducing, the impact of the disorder. This we found was necessary because right now, presently, for fiscal year 2023, they only have about $35,000. Yes, we all know that there is this settlement coming, but we didn't want to risk not knowing when they would get that money. So the person that did present at the Finance Committee meeting, who manages this money, was it was very convincing that we needed this so that they could continue the good work that they do.
Thank you.
Ready? Oh, you got some more questions?
Just since Director Simmons is here, I don't know if he wanted to add anything.
Oh, yes, sorry, I didn't, there is in the back.
We are trying to move through.
I get it.
Pretty much you nailed it.
Oh, yay.
One thing I want to make sure that everybody knows is it's for the 4 programs, not just the OEM. Naptown, Antidote, Your Life Matters. This is for 4 programs, not just OEM. It's for Naptown Anti-Dope Movement. It's for Your Life Matters. It's for the Police Department Substance Use Disorder Program and OEM.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, the next is number.
Yeah. Sure.
All right, so number 15, also from the Finance Committee, increases the funding for the Mayor's Initiative on Crime within Recreation and Parks using the reserve for one-time funds.
Yes, thank you. As you all know, Alderwoman Pendle Charles has presented a program, the title being Love.
Annapolis United.
Okay, but what are the 3 words?
Love our children, love our neighbors, peace is here, stop the violence.
So as far as the first part, love our children, part of the program is the involvement of our Recs and Parks department. And not all of the estimated money was put in fiscal year 2023 for the respective camps and after-school programs. And we listened to Director Trader at the Finance Committee meeting, and we were convinced that that they should have this additional money so that there is this program and that it's successful, and it is a quote-unquote pilot. I don't know if there's Director Trader is here if he wishes to add to that or not. Or Alderman Pendle Charles.
And is this to supplement the Haca's inability to get camps this summer? Or this is additional?
No, Mayor, I just want to say one thing quickly.
Yep.
First of all, number one, I think, and Director Trader and I have talked about this many times, and I'll say the failure of our school system, and as well as our employment opportunities, as well as our housing in the city of Annapolis over the past 100 years or so, has brought us to the point where we need a lot of these programs for our city. Let's start with that. The other thing is for this program, as you all know, I think the directors had to submit their budgets January/February. By the time we got to March is when that uptick in violence occurred. So the budgets had already been submitted. So once we kind of looked at where we were at that point, that's when Director Trader realized that there needed to be some supplemental added to the budget. And so otherwise, it more than likely been in the budget, but the way the time slot was handled, the timeline did not, wasn't part of it. We didn't have that until sort of February, March, things started escalating. So I just want to say that.
Director Trader?
I just want to really emphasize that this is a crisis. Crisis unprecedented in our city. Having grown up in this city, I can attest to it. And I also wanted to say that besides recreation and leisure, a strong emphasis will be put on enrichment and development and education. Thank you.
Thank you.
One other thing, I know Alderman Gay said he wanted to be a co-sponsor, so we're looking for that at some point. Thank you, Alderman Gay.
Thank you. Alderman Savage.
I'm still not clear on what programs this would go to exactly, though.
This program,
what activities?
There was an outline in Director Trader's initial proposal on March the 2nd. It was augmented, I think it was March the 20th. There were litany of programs. If you need that, we can certainly send it to you.
Yeah, I mean, we'll need it before the vote, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The Finance Committee got their copy at the different budget meetings, but I can certainly send that to you and send it back around.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Director Dickinson.
Yes.
And before we go on, just to be clear, so we're supportive of this as well, this program, and we funded it at $85,000 in the budget. So this would be an additional $100,000 above the 85 that's funded.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's what I was raising my hand for. I wanted to make sure everybody knew this was an additional $100,000 to the 85.
Same.
Okay, so then we'll move on to number 16. This is from the Finance Committee, increasing the funding for an assistant city attorney in the Office of Law. Now, we had already put some money in there for contractual services, but this gives enough funding to make it a full-time employee, and I have to correct myself in that it's not a civil service employee, it's an exempt service employee.
Attorney?
Yes, let me explain. During the Finance Committee meetings, the Law Office presented a very extensive summary of their litigation accomplishments and also the work that they had done for us, as well as the ordinances and lawsuits and money saved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you got nothing out of that presentation, it was that we have very litigious society, city. We have loopholes, for lack of a better word, in our code that need some proactive attention from the law office. And most importantly is, it's unfortunate that it takes this to look at, are we doing this the most efficient way? And contractual services are not the most efficient way in addressing these issues. We were told by the city attorney that this new position would be multidisciplined and do cross-legal issues, which would be very beneficial. One other point is that hiring outside counsel is less control and very expensive, and depending on the effort and the expertise. For example, labor contracts, we're negotiating labor contracts right now, and it costs us about $100,000 for 8 months of work. And perhaps that's something that we can do in-house where we have more control. So yeah, it is unfortunate that, this is technically an add to staff, but it's an efficient use of budget dollars to accomplish the short and long-term goals of our law office, and that essentially is what this, budget is all about. So,
Thank you, Alderman Gay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. And then, I'm not opposed to using ARPA money, but I am opposed to using ARPA money for non-social acts. My question then, how would you fund it next year? Or are you planning to use the ARPA funding next year as well?
If I understand the logic in using the ARPA money, that's really addressing the structural deficit impact this has. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the logic in using the ARPA money? Yeah. It's revenue replacement to offset the budget increase. I don't know if it's the application is for the reason or for just that gap in revenue that I've used.
So there's 63 here. There has to be another 100 or something somewhere else, correct?
Yeah, we couldn't find it from another department or anything like that, nor did I think it was our place to.
No, I'm saying, because it says increases funding for an assistant city attorney.
There's already an additional $100,000 in this budget within the Office of Law's budget in contract services for this purpose. And this 63 makes the Office of Law able to hire an exempt service attorney.
In lieu of the contract services.
Not in lieu of. It takes, in order to hire and pension and whatever, and the medical benefits for a full-time employee, it's $163,000. So there's 100 in there?
Correct.
We're adding 63.
Yeah, wrong word. It's a net add, right.
So they'd be a full-time employee, and then in the next fiscal year, we would find the funding for them?
This would be an add to, we have $1,532,000 in next year's budget using ARPA funds to cover ongoing expenses, and this would increase that number to 1 million, close to 1.6 million.
Yeah, the logic.
And yes, it would assume to continue into the next year, and we would have to find funding for it.
I know full well, as finance chair, but the logic there is it's sort of what in that category of pay now, save later. Looking forward, looking ahead at more, litigious atmosphere, et cetera. We thought that this was very prudent to do now, and that using a contractor was not the most efficient way to address this need.
Alderman Pendle-Charles is next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And remember, we're trying to get through these things, so we all comment on everything. We will be here.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to hear Mr. Lyles, especially from the savings that he indicated to us at the budget hearing, what he has done in the office to pretty much kind of save us some money.
Well, over the last 2 years, we have saved the city hundreds of thousands of dollars in either cutting the need for external attorneys, averaging $100,000 a year, cutting their hourly rate.
I'd like for everyone to hear this. I'd like for everyone to hear Mr. Lyles. That would be really good, because I know we have some discrepancies on this funding. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
Additionally, in the first year of my tenure, we cut the hourly rates for attorneys, which were averaging about $400 an hour, down to a maximum of $250 an hour for every lawyer. We have saved the city in several matters approximately $4 million. In one particular issue where we did hire outside counsel, we were able to manage those attorneys to keep their fees low, negotiating a reduction in their hourly rate, but save the city over $120,000 in a retirement issue that had come up for the city. So we have proven that we're able to save the city hundreds of thousands of dollars in any particular term. We have litigated satisfactorily all of our cases to the point where we're probably 95% successful in all litigation, as well as collecting more money in municipal infractions than the city has collected in years and years prior to our tenure, meaning that we have been more aggressive in collecting municipal infractions and fine money by not allowing those municipal infractions to sit and wait for some appropriate time in the future. When the municipal infractions come, we file them in court and we pursue those monies.
Thank you, Mr. Lyles.
Alderman Savage?
And yeah, as far as the time, I mean, I think it's important that we go through these. I don't know if we need to all do it today, but I don't know when else we're going to have the chance to go through these amendments. I think it's helpful to get people's thoughts on some of these. But as far as this proposal, I still have the concern. I think I hear comment about this being short-term, about this being a revenue replacement, but it's still, we need to keep in mind, it's only short-term. We're going to run out of the ARPA money, and I think we're hearing from the city administration, or from the city manager and finance director, that there are concerns about adding any kind of permanent staff. So my one question that has to do with, if anybody has background in terms of why this is an exempt, why are the city attorney, assistant city attorneys exempt positions and not civil service positions? Because the only other office that has exempt is the mayor's office, and I think the city manager has a few exempt positions, and which are basically at the will of the mayor, if I'm not mistaken. But what, if you, maybe do you know what the rationale was originally to have this office just be exempt positions?
So, once upon a time,
Microphone on?
it is on. It's just not near my mouth. Okay. So once upon a time, the city attorney was a position that was on retainer. And then, of course, the city attorney was brought on board as serving at the pleasure of the mayor. And so for a number of years, positions that were assigned to that department were very small in number, and that number was one additional position that was assigned, and the determination at that time was that the position was contractual, and then later became a member of the exempt service because the city attorney served at the pleasure of the mayor. Those positions were assigned in alignment to the mayor's office. And so those positions have been exempt service positions since their creation. And when they went from moving positions from contractual into a more permanent status, it was determined that they should appropriately be exempt service positions.
Was that looked at as a part of any kind of, I don't know if the compensation study would be appropriate, but I'm just wondering now if the office is getting larger and larger, does it make sense to have so many exempt positions in there?
So I can't answer that question in terms of it was evaluated when the positions of Attorney 1 and Attorney 2 were created. I looked at comparable salaries in other jurisdictions, and I also learned at that time in that survey that many positions were in the exempt service. So one major comparator was Baltimore County. Those positions in Baltimore County are all in the exempt service. It's not unusual for those to be assigned that way. I haven't refreshed that since back when, but that's kind of the nexus of where that came from. Mike? That's it.
Mr. City Attorney?
Yeah, I can answer that. Generally, because attorneys provide legal advice and provide legal advice in a client specific way, and we are legally obligated by the state to zealously represent that client and to provide the advice that that client requests without taking into account our own personal status. It is required, probably recommended across legal jobs all across the country at federal, state, and local that these positions are exempt. We serve at the pleasure of, meaning should we be personally conflicted or interest conflicted with serving our client, the client has the opportunity to fire us. And this is probably the only kind of position. There are other positions like that, but like political appointees, we fall in that category because at any point where our opinions or our interests conflict with the client has the opportunity to fire us. A civil servant has certain rights, that the person has to be doing something wrong to be terminated. And that's really not the position that we as lawyers are in. We can be doing everything right. You don't like what we say, we can be fired. We know that, we accept it, and it's part of our obligation to meet the needs of our clients at any particular time, either in a private capacity or in a governmental capacity.
Alderman Tierney?
Yes, real quickly. I just want to also say that the most important part of this is just to realize the efficiency of it. Where else would be more important, no offense to attorneys, that you have you have control of how many hours your attorney is actually working on something, when I gather when there's outside attorneys, you don't have as much control. And we've seen that. So just keep that in mind. It's an efficiency, it's an efficient use of the dollars in the budget.
And if I can just add, just because you have outside attorneys doesn't mean that they shouldn't be managed. So you're almost paying double, because you got outside attorneys and we have to manage their hours, we have to manage their work, we have to review everything that they do. So you're getting double work for the dollar. And if we just hired internally people with certain experience levels or trained them up, we wouldn't have to do double work.
Thank you. Director Dickinson?
Okay, the next one is 17 from the Finance Committee, increasing the funding for the South Forest Drive Business Association using the reserve for one-time funds.
Yeah.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
I mean, it's $1,000, so we got to talk about this.
I'd like Alderwoman Finlayson.
It could be removed actually because of the Eastport United Methodist mix-up, and so we can use the leftover, or as I had money coming from Maryland Hall go into them. So should I put my amendment in to just give the money to them so that we don't have to use the one time?
You are free to amend your amendment that way.
I'll do that then. Yeah. So you could take this amendment out. I had an amendment that was giving money to Eastport United Methodist Church, but because they had to pull out, there's now free community service money, and I'll just put it there.
In the community grant listing.
Hold on, can somebody, what
Alderman Gay,
amendment?
your amendment was to move funding from Maryland Hall to Eastport. And now we can replace Eastport with SOFO.
So we have a funding source, is what you're saying?
You would take, in community grants, his amendment suggests moving money from Maryland Hall.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have to prove that we're moving money from Maryland Hall. That has not been approved yet. So that's the proposal. Take it away in community grants, take away from Maryland Hall and move it to SOFA.
Correct. So is there a need for two amendments or rewording this?
So I'm a little confused.
Well, that's not good.
So this money was not intended to be a community grant, am I correct?
Well, why don't we start from the beginning and have I'm sorry to cut you off. Alderwoman Finlayson, can you explain what it's for?
I mean, everybody else seems to already have weighed in, so I don't know what. We wanted to give SOFO $1,000. They did receive $1,000 from the community grants, but the Finance Committee thought that they requested $2,000. So we decided that it would be prudent to make this amendment. So no, I do not want to withdraw this amendment. Right. We would like to keep it in because we don't know what's going to happen down the road to anything. So this is the Finance. Excuse me, Alderman Gay. This is the Finance Committee recommendation. So you can be a co-sponsor if you'd like.
No, I don't want to be a co-sponsor.
Okay.
I was trying to save us one-time money, but you do you, and I'll save my amendment.
That sounds good.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, there's another one that deals with Forest Drive, which would take us to number 30, where is it? 38. If I could speak to that very quickly.
Hang on. Well, that is the next one, so we will.
38 is the next one?
Oh, 38.
No,
sorry.
I think, I'm good with that.
I didn't look at the back of the page.
Good with that. But if I can do two at once, I mean, and maybe City Manager Gerald can help with this, because this funding for the Forest Drive map, which was a map that was titled Shop Forest Drive, which encouraged support for businesses on Forest Drive. It covers 5 wards, and I had hoped all along that all 5 wards would be supported. Number 38 on the list. But that had been funded previously. But when I double-checked the other day, just to make sure the funding was still there, I was told that the funding was not there. It was simply for $5,000. I already have the bill from the printer for the map, but it was a map of Forest Drive, Shop Forest Drive. We were all going to get 1,000 copies of this map to distribute freely in our wards. So if this has to stay in,
Is it done and ready to be paid? Because if so, we should use current year money to pay for that.
Yeah, we can't use
Not even
FY23 money
discuss it
for
in this.
Yeah,
if it's still in 22, I'm good. But this is just in case it's not.
It's not, but we'd have to find some funding for it, because we can't use 23 monies to pay an FY22 service. So we will see if we can find another source for you in this year's budget.
Okay, I'm good. See?
Would you like to withdraw then?
Check that off. Pardon me?
Would you like to withdraw the amendment then?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not till we find the money for it.
Right.
Thank you.
Director Dickinson, number 18.
So we turn to number 18, and this is for recreation software using ARPA funds. I had word that this might be withdrawn, but we haven't had confirmation from the councilwoman.
That's my understanding.
Yes,
that is being
it should be withdrawn.
And since Alderwoman Finlayson tagged hers together, we can go down 18, 19, 20, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, all of mine, because everything in there is in your handy dandy green booklet, and you have all the narratives for those on all of those amendments. Say it again. As 22, as funding to the Office of the Mayor for consultant, number 19. Increased training and education funding to rec and parks using ARPA. 20, increased funding for basketball officials within Stanton Center budget using the reserve for one-time funds. I'm going to skip over because Alderman Finlayson is on the next one. 22, as funding to the Office of the Mayor for a consultant to identify barriers to city services using reserve for one-time funds, and that's been changed. We were asking for an assistant ombudsman and equity officer, but my understanding from the Finance Committee that it sounded too much like reoccurring funds. I don't agree, but they're the consultants, they're the folks, so I have to go along with what they say. Number 32, adds funding to Rec and Parks for Annapolis Men's Summer Basketball League mural using reserve for one-time funds. 33, adds funding to Rec and Parks for youth tennis court on the campus of the Walter S. Mills Pro Elementary School feasibility study using reserve one-time funds. 34, adds funding to Rec and Parks for Annapolis United Historic Clay Street Adams Park Open Space feasibility study using reserve for one-time funds. And Alderwoman O'Neill and I have discussed that, and I've given her some additional information since this started before she came on the council. 35, adds funding to Mayor's Office for video documentary of Annapolis United using reserve one-time funds. 36, adds funding to Rec and Parks for Community Summer Fun Day. A child is born using the reserve for one-time funds. And what we're looking for this Annapolis United is we're gonna go from prenatal to pensioners. And there are many activities and events going on through that.
What are you doing?
Say that, Alderman Arnett?
I'm trying to figure out what we're doing. We can all read this for ourselves. Are you asking these be deleted?
No. I'm just saying, I'm just telling you what we can all put together at one time so we won't waste any time.
So we have.
Well, we
we're
need
doing
to
them
know
as a
what they're
block.
for.
Huh?
We can't.
We need to have some conversation.
No one's voting on them. We're just
No.
talking them through right now.
I'm just talking them through and adding
Now we're not
anecdotal.
talking them through. We're just
Reading the headline.
Yeah, and I'm adding anecdotal information that may not be in your packets. Is that okay?
I don't, I'm hearing you read each of these.
Right, and I'm adding
And I can read the
anecdotal.
name. What I want to know is what's the additional information?
It's in your green folder that I gave out on Monday night on all of your dais
I don't have
tables. I put it there.
She did. It's right here.
I did on
Yeah, I
Monday.
know, I understand.
Everybody got one.
I know, but this is also for the public too, to hear.
Exactly. And like I said, I'm also adding some little anecdotal. So you don't have a green folder?
I have it at home.
Okay. Okay. 36, as funding direct and parts for community summer fun day, a child is born using reserve for one-time funds. 37, as funding direct and parts for community education months, and that's at Woodside Gardens, using the reserve for one-time funds. And that's it. So if you all have any questions now, that'll be fine. That's not in the folder, but if it's in the folder.
See, the good news is you can take your green folders and go and see Alderman Pindell Charles afterwards if you have any really hard questions. Alderman Gay had his hand up first.
Yep, very quickly. So your amendment 18 you're removing, correct? Adds funding to recreation software using ARPA?
Yes, that's the information I received from Director Trader.
Awesome, and thank you. And then again, here, I think maybe a duplication that could be handled by Arts and Public Places, the mural project.
They have already gotten some funding from Art and Public Places, but not all funding. There's still a deficit when it comes to funding.
They have over almost $300,000. They
And I
couldn't give you
understand it,
$5,000.
but like you, and like Alderwoman Finlayson said, don't want to do that until, if there's funding for that, but there, great. If not, then we've got this amendment.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'll
Certainly.
support, yeah.
Thank you, Alderman Arnett.
What is the source of funding for 18?
18 is omitted.
It's what?
It's omitted,
Oh, it's
withdrawn.
stricken.
Yes,
All
sir.
right.
But
What
it's
is
a
the
good
source
idea.
for 19?
One time.
No, 19
Is
is
it-
ARPA.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Thank you, Ms. Conley. Right, it's ARPA.
And 20 is,
20
If you
is
look
one.
at the, if you look at the end of the, I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you
Go,
off.
no, go right ahead, Ms. Conley.
It's right at the end of the description. It'll tell you where the funding's coming from.
okay, so it's,
For each one.
so it's one time only.
Correct.
And so there won't be, in the next fiscal year, funding for the officials for the Stanton Center?
The request was made for one-time funding. This is all under Annapolis United, and I guess we're gonna have to revisit that to see where we are for fiscal year '24. I can't make any promises, not gonna do that.
Thank you, Alderman Savage. We've got 2 minutes to go now, so let's get, I want to feel the council here. If somebody wants to take over and share this through, if we can keep people here. How many
I
of
think we've
you
got
want to stay?
rid of a lot of them.
How many of you can stay? Can you stay or not? So I think we're going to have to, this is,
Could we
What?
go-
yeah.
Could we go to the big ticket item, which is number 21?
Yeah, I think
Which
we
is
should
the
do that
fire
after
department?
Alderman Savage is
Oh,
just
I'm
finishing
sorry.
up with Alderman Pindell Charles. We'll go through to the
Well,
big ticket
I mean,
item on that.
We set up this meeting to go through all of the amendments. I feel like we're doing a disservice to those of us who haven't even gone to ours, but also to Alderwoman Pindell Charles, who just flew through these. I've got questions, like I have questions for everybody thus far. I'm here until we need to get this done or we schedule something else. The whole point was to go through this. Some of them we may learn need to be stricken, we need to adjust the amounts so we can actually figure out what the amendments are definitely going to be. And for staff to know before our all-day meeting to make that a bit easier on us, but also on staff, right? So rushing through this, I don't see why we have to have a cutoff of 5. This is our meeting. It doesn't matter when we have it advertised. Our meetings go well beyond the advertised amounts routinely for our council meetings. If we need to vote on it to extend it, let's do it. But like, this is just, I don't understand why we're breaking from the process we all agreed upon.
Alderman Savage, I kind of anticipated we were getting a crunch. That's one reason why I did the folder with the specifics in it. So if you had questions, I know, but if you had
That doesn't help
questions.
the public, though. This
I
is
got it.
also
I
partially a
understand.
public conversation, so we have all this information out there.
I understand.
They don't have your handbook. That wasn't posted online in Legistar.
No.
That should be
It's for
public
us.
information if that's what we're trying to draw out here.
I understand, but like I said, at least for our edification on the dais.
So we have scheduled staff till 5 o'clock. That's what
do you
the
mean
thing said.
scheduled staff? I mean, they come to our council meetings. They've been to our budget meetings that have gone well over 12 hours before. Like, what do you mean? I
Well,
mean,
I'm sure staff have families and they have commitments just like us. I don't know what their commitments are. I don't know what your commitments are, but we have different commitments at different times. So, no, I'm scheduled till 5 o'clock. I've got a commitment after this. So,
Mr. Mayor, if I could. Thank you. I would again just ask, as I've done 896 million times before, that the city manager instruct his staff to schedule our work sessions longer than 3 hours. We've had this discussion plenty of times about the 5 o'clock cutoff, and
We usually start at 3 and go till 5. This started at 2 and it's going till 5.
Okay, well, listen, I know when I signed up to run for office, I knew I'd have to sit in meetings, and so this is not an unreasonable expectation, but I agree with my colleague that we should at some point finish the amendments. Maybe we have it rescheduled. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Mr. City Manager, have you guys got time to go over, or what are your commitments?
We're going to stay till the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
why does the city attorney office have to leave at this time?
City has to leave.
I don't ask staff. I tell them when the end of the day is, they schedule. I don't make them stay if they can't stay. I can stay. I can only speak for myself, right?
The alternative is to schedule another meeting before the 6th. I mean, this is millions of dollars, and we should not fly through it. That is shirking our fiduciary responsibility. I have lots of questions about these. Some of them are huge sums of money. And I think that we need to give it due diligence, and each one of us needs to hear from the other about their amendments. I was kind to the committee. I have none.
Yeah.
So you could have skipped the meeting for mine, but.
And that's why I did ask the city manager if there was another plan for this, if we had an extra meeting planned. But it sounded like the answer was we were going to talk it through on the, what was the date? On the 6th, right? Okay, so.
The only difficulty in that is we may have to we'll draft up these amendments in writing, and then if we have, as we talk today, there may be some changes, right? Those other ones that haven't been discussed yet, we might have to redraft if there's some change to them. So.
Well,
Okay, I'm going to step out. I'm going to let Alderman Annette jump in. We're at 21, the big one there for.
It is, you know, it's the council's choice, what you want to, if you want to do it then or have another scheduled meeting, but that will, we may have to redraft some of the amendments on that.
Let's keep it going for a little while and see how we do. We just went through a whole bunch of Pendell-Charles amendments, and I think that went fast.
I mean, we're not through them as far as I'm concerned. We haven't even started to ask questions about them.
Well, really, they're not the six-figure amendments that everyone else is talking about, so.
Oh, so we should just approve them all? I mean.
No, I'm not asking you to approve them all. I'm asking you to ask Alderman Pendell-Charles about them, right? So, Alderman Annette, or not? No?
It has to be televised.
No, I'm saying the staff in the audience.
I didn't set the schedule.
I feel like they could. I feel
Except
bad.
for the fire department.
I
We need
feel
the fire
bad.
department.
Well, if they were told 5 o'clock, I mean, but that's part of the problem is they probably should have been told this might be a longer meeting. But I mean, if that's what they were told, I don't want to keep them here forever. But
And Cindy can
I think that's should have been planned differently.
All right. So I believe we're at Finlayson Amendment 21.
Which one are, okay,
21?
21, correct.
21.
Correct.
I'm sorry, Alderman Savage?
I think we're on Amendment 19. Bill Charles.
Okay. All
I
right.
mean, but are we going to go through this now and keep staff here, or are we going to try to reschedule, or just deal with this on the 6th? I mean, to get through all these, we're not going to get through all these within the next, we'll probably need at least another hour and a half, 2 hours. If staff had the expectation of leaving here at 5, then I don't know if we should be
We're taking
pushing that.
time now. Can you, if you have questions, are they significant? Or can you just communicate those questions with Alderwoman Pendle Charles?
I know Alderman Savage said he wanted the public to kind of hear the answers.
Okay. Well, we're here. I propose that we finish what we've started and be done. I mean, to do this to staff again is, I don't know.
I don't even, can we make motions during work sessions? So we're going to continue unless there's a motion to adjourn. And so we're at number 19. Did you have a question, Alderman Savage, on the training increases?
Well, I'm just curious what the training education is for, what employees, what program?
I think Director Trader can better answer that. Director Trader, about the training and education increases.
I mean, for Mr. Chair, I'm also wondering, I mean, we're going to be moving forward without 3 of our colleagues, including the mayor. I don't know.
Increases training and education funding for rec and parks, ARPA funding, which is $15,000 you had in that goal sheet.
Yeah.
Alderman Savage had some questions about that.
What are the questions?
Alderman Savage, Director Trader wanted to know what exactly your questions are.
Just what, increased training and education, what kind of training and education, and for what staff?
Well, we're going to have some career development, training, workshops. We're going to have basic, fundamental tutoring of core subjects.
Need your mic on. We should just make that be on all the time.
Mr. Trader, that's for staff, education and training for staff?
So, 10,000?
No, the education and training funding, your ARPA money for $15,000, isn't that for staff, training and education for staff?
Yes, customer service.
Right.
So customer service training, and you said career development, tutoring. Do you have a training budget?
Not tutoring, I misunderstood your question. This pertains to staff at the Pip Moyer Center.
Okay, so staff training for customer relations. Do you have a training, what's currently budgeted for training and education for Rec and Parks?
We have various
is there anything?
line items in different divisions.
And this would be for?
It's less than 25.
But which division would this be?
Pardon me?
Which division would this be for?
It's various divisions such as parks, front desk, and the administration. We have a training line item as well. It's less than $25 per staff person when you add it all up.
And for the finance department, how much is
I think it's a total of $11,000 across all Rec and Parks.
current in the current proposed budget, 11,000?
It says 15 on this sheet.
That's the addition to the 11,000.
Oh, okay. I understand. Thank you.
Alderwoman Tierney, and then I do have a question for
Thank you very much. I think, could I make a suggestion to Alderwoman Pendle Charles? I really think we need to frame this because all of these are part of an initiative, and for example, that part of that initiative is giving X dollars to Recs and Parks to develop all of these programs. So just so that we understand the order of magnitude, how much money in this program, I can't add them all up, but how much money is going towards Parks and Recs for this police initiative? Can you answer that roughly?
185.
So
Everything, 185.
So if I added all these up, it would add up to 185,000.
That's
These
my
are the
understanding.
different components.
Once you add it, it's not 185?
No, there's 85 in the budget. You put 100,000 on another line item, and all of these little pieces are in addition to that. So we're,
okay.
you know, I don't know what they add to 100, and another $50,000, $60,000 on top of that 185.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't clear on it,
Yeah,
but thank you, Ms. Dickinson.
It's a big picture thing. I just wanted to not lose sight of. But I agree we should go over each one as part of this thing.
One thing I just want to add, what I've just personally noticed, just going to Rec and Parks, they're probably the most front-facing of the public of any department we have. Not to minimize planning and zoning or any of those, but they're your frontline folks, and they have a lot of customers that come through hour after hour, day after day, hundreds, I would suspect. And so customer service is extremely important. And Director Trade and I have talked about that on several occasions. And I'm not trying to give any kind of examples, but we know that we've had pickleball and tennis. I won't say pickleball versus tennis, but you have constituencies that come through who are right there and need some sort of response. And so customer service, from what I gather, is a large part of Rec and Parks' front-facing, for lack of a better term. And once we start with the rest of these initiatives, that's going to be even more important. Now, that's me speaking. I don't work for Rec and Parks. I'm just going by my own self-visualization as to what I see that comes in and out, and that's my understanding, because I kind of listen sometimes to what the customers are saying or what they're asking for, and I know sometimes Mr. Trader has to come out and talk to the customer one-on-one. So I'm just going by what I see my own self. Am I correct?
Also, to add to that, we actually serve 300,000 people per year. I will repeat that. We serve about 300,000 people per year. So when you put that in perspective, you put in perspective the amount of staff members that we have, we need additional training. The last time that I trained my staff as a department at a retreat at I forgot where it was Mayo Beach, and got the beach free from the Anne Arundel County Recreation and Parks. We actually got the money from HR. HR purchased an instructor for customer service. We did not have the money at that particular time, which was pre-COVID.
So my question is, I'm a big fan of staff training, but this feels very much like a budget enhancement. And it also sounds like it's more than doubling what the administration budgeted for your training. So are we going to let every other department come back in and ask for enhancements for training and all these other things? I mean, this feels kind of siloed to one department when I think all departments need staff training. So I'd ask the administration, presumably there was a budget judgment made when you submitted the mayor's budget on training across the board. Is this something that you did not consider? Or is this something you considered in the context of training for all departments?
So I don't recall cutting any requests for training, Katie. So we provided the funding that was requested by the department for training. This is something over and above what was presented to us.
So it is an enhancement.
Alderman
Savage.
Arnett, I don't know if any other department services 300,000 front-facing persons. I don't know. I'm just speaking for myself. Now, maybe Mr. Reggie or maybe Director Tricia Hopkins can add something to the discussion.
Well, it's just not for customer service. It's about leadership training. It's about management training. And we're giving a chance also for frontline employees to be trained. And our frontline employees in the recreation department is extremely important because obviously they are the first people who contact the public. Sometimes way before I get in contact with the public or middle management, it is frontline. And we don't have many opportunities for frontline employees to be trained. The emphasis is usually on management. And we need to really expand upon that and bring our frontline employees into the fold of professional training. They can work 20 years with the city of Annapolis and never sit in a training room.
So as I stated, I am an advocate of staff training, and I'm an advocate of staff training across all departments. And this feels to me like it's out of context. I feel that every department put in requests for training, and it was considered by the administration. They gave us a budget. If we're going to go back and single out a department one at a time, it seems to me appropriate to go back and consider all of the departments for training. And that's why I asked the question of the administration. Was there a training request in your submission in the mayor's budget? And the answer was yes. Sounds like it was 11,000. This is more than doubling that. That's a big increase. And admittedly, all departments are important and all training is important.
Let me just
Matt,
say
I want to hear from
one thing first. This is all part of Annapolis United as well. So this whole package, but I don't want to lose sight of the focus of the Annapolis United initiative. And I stated earlier, the budget, some of this didn't come until after the department submitted their budgets when we saw what was happening in our city as far as the violence is concerned. So that's all part of this, but definitely Ms. Hopkins.
Is Annapolis United Initiative a city program?
It's out of the mayor's office. The proposal that Mr. Trader provided is out of the mayor's office. And I will send you all that proposal that Mr. Trader did back in March.
I wish the mayor here to.
It's his name on it. Is that true, Mr. Trader? And that mayor's name is on that proposal that you submitted back in March.
We have all funding in Recs and Parks, so.
Right. Exactly.
So I'm not exactly sure how you want me to speak to this, but because I'm not familiar with what Recreation and Parks is asking for specifically. We have done customer service training. We have had departments come and ask for specific assistance. Yes, we did help Recreation and Parks before. You have turnover. This is a department that has a lot of, temp employees. There's probably, compared to other departments, more turnover in that regard. We are actually trying to create a training for conflict resolution that's more customer service oriented because, and I think I spoke to this more in HR's budget presentation, that citywide we have individuals that are trying to deal with ignitable people, and try to manage a skill set that's dealing more with the challenges of resolving conflict or at least settling down people who have high demands or expectations in a way that they can still maintain a good relationship and a good image as city employees. So I'm speaking this way because really it is kind of across the city need and expectation. So I hear you on that, Alderman Arnett, in that regard. It's not to say that the initiative that Director Trader's speaking to isn't something really important to them. it may be something that we could leverage across the city as well. I mean, so if you're considering this as not a reasonable choice to tailor it to a particular department, know that we could probably leverage this across the city a bit, in a bit wider reach as well.
So
Just an idea.
You are part of the administration and you're HR, and it seems to me that HR should have purview over training across the departments, at least in an advisory capacity. And that's why I keep going back to the administration and saying, sounds to me like the administration for each department considered the training requests, came up with a recommendation, and I think that's as it should be. This feels like it's a singular push for one department, and it feels, quite frankly, unfair to me that all other departments aren't here to be able to make that same kind of request for training, which I think we undervalue in the city.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to talk over you. I was asked at HR budget presentation about what funding level we'd had in the past, and I did provide that information because we were funded at a higher level years ago. I think we had more like, working off the top of my head because my papers are back there, but probably had about $40,000 in training for citywide money, which is just still really conservative, given, you know, what could be the needs across the city as well for citywide training.
Alderwoman Finlayson, I know Alderman Savage, but I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor. You will recall a number of years ago, and Ms. Hopkins will also, when we eliminated all training across all departments because of budget implications.
It's not unusual. That's the first to go. I mean, it feels like.
And now we're trying to fix that, it appears, but it's piecemeal. We don't have a citywide initiative or policy that speaks to training, and particularly as it relates to customer service. And I contend that all of our departments do are customer service at various levels. But the One Annapolis program sounds like a program that's being implemented without the aldermen being part of and agreeing to implement this program. So I think we need to step back a bit and figure out exactly what this all entails and how we can get behind it. But we're piecemealing it now and hoping that it comes to better fruition than what we have now. And that's just not, I don't think, the best approach. So, you know, that's my 2 cents worth. We've gone down this road trying to fix something, and we're not there yet. Whether it's a public safety thing or a policy thing, we're not there yet. Thank you.
I agree with that sentiment, but what I would ask of the administration for our budget consideration is the per capita training for each department, the amount per capita. This is more than doubling, but still it's a small amount of money, and I do subscribe to the notion that we want all of our staff, as Alderwoman Finlayson, to have a good customer training, conflict resolution. Of course, we want to do that. It's better than showing up in a classroom with an AR-15. But I think that the Alderwoman Finlayson is correct. I think we need a broader understanding of what we're doing vis-a-vis training. I also think we should recognize some departments make decisions about their own priorities within, and they find some programs more critical than training, and so may willingly sacrifice training because they want more safety equipment or something like that. Speaking of something that's coming up next in the agenda here. So by just having this siloed look at Parks and Recs gives me some pause. I think we need to be looking at this more globally. We are asking for significant enhancements for one department. all the other departments asked for enhancements. Many of them were granted as a part of the mayor's budget. Many of them were appeals that were made after the mayor's budget, and we'll have to deal with that when we get to voting on the budget. But this feels very much out of context for me. Alderman Savage, you are next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn, which I'll explain if seconded.
Second.
Second? All right. Motion to adjourn has been made and seconded.
May I explain?
I think the city attorney comes back just in time. I don't know if there's discussion on a motion to adjourn.
If you want to entertain it, you can entertain it.
I'll entertain it.
So I've decided to make the motion because I just, thinking about this discussion and discussions to come on these amendments, since we're missing 3 of our members, I think to be most efficient, as we talked about, we should probably just do this when everybody's here on the 6th. We're going to be having the same conversation about, I really don't want to have to explain personally some of my amendments twice when I just do it once. And I don't know if anybody else feels the same.
Alderwoman Finlay, Alderman Tierney.
I'm going to be in opposition to that. We heard Ms. Dickinson say that amendments may have to be reworked as a result of discussions that we're having. If we wait until the 6th, there won't be an opportunity for her to do that. This timing was deliberate in giving the finance department an opportunity to make changes so they can give us the actual numbers. We don't, I'm not even going to say that. So we want to be able to be provided with the actual numbers. That's one reason I'm going to oppose the motion on the floor. The other is because fire is still sitting here, and they have the biggest item on this list. And I think it deserves a discussion right now because their amendment, our amendment for them, and Alderman Savage, you initiated this. I think it deserves a discussion now so that finance can know how to deal with this. Because there is some discussions about whether we do it all or part of it or whatever. I think we need to have that discussion today. And if we want to prolong the meeting on the 6th, it's going to go longer than 8 hours if we're going to put off all the discussion on the rest of these items, including yours. So that's my position, and I'm sticking with it.
Okay. Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to hear. She just left, but I don't believe we can get this all done on June 6th. I think we might have to look at another meeting or not. I mean, I'm being a realist. We're probably going to go back on June 6th. If we finish tonight, we're still going to go back to on June 6th and go through them all and vote on them. And you're going to have them ready. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Are you seeing this all doable? I guess there's 2 scenarios. If we adjourn, then you have this marathon meeting. And
I think there's a lot that we can work out, if that we can work out with each council person too, in between.
Outside the meeting?
Correct.
For clarifications?
Right.
And all?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, if we want to have the meeting on the 6th, right, I have to have amendments. To my understanding, they have to be online, right, by Friday.
Ready to vote on.
So that means that I have to have them drafted by Wednesday. And that means that.
What is today?
Right.
Thursday.
So, and they're already they're drafted, but they need to be finalized and reviewed and checked and all that. So there's a big process behind the scenes. So my ask today was going to be, at the end of today, if there's any changes in where you want the funding to go to, via what department, what office, or change the funding source, or if you want to co-sponsor, I need to have that by Monday, the latest.
Could we do that?
They're already due on, go ahead.
I was just looking sort of at a hybrid solution. Could we go through the list, verify funding? I mean, there's not that many people left to discuss the merit of the amendment, but discuss funding, discuss is it viable or if it's going to be withdrawn, so you at least have your inventory settled so that we could go through them to vote on at the 6th.
David, do you want to? That's fine with us.
Alderman Gay?
I just think, look, we've been here. We're still on amendment, what?
19?
Yeah, 19. I have even some questions that we haven't even got a chance to go over in finance regarding the police budget and the requirements that the state mandates. We have not had a chance to talk about that. I mean, so we could be here till about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock tonight, and I don't think the staff is happy about that. So
I don't think I'm happy about it.
I don't think anybody. So, but my thing is it possible to meet again before the 6th? I mean, I think the individual conversations are fine, but we need to be in group settings. So is that possible that we could do that before then? Maybe if we just throw again another 3 hours on, and or do you just want to push through?
Yeah, no, we could set something up for next week. We have closed session on Tuesday, but we could do something on Thursday or, God forbid, Friday. But yeah, we could set something up.
But, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, what's, I don't know the right word, what's wrong about this is we are gonna duplicate no matter what. You know what I mean? We're going through these and we're deliberating and discussing, and then when we go through them again, I guarantee you we're gonna be deliberating and discussing. So that's why I'm suggesting, at least today, let's go through and make sure we have the right inventory of amendments, and then let's allow a meeting to discuss and deliberate them more, unless you want to stay tonight and do that. Inevitably, they all have to be deliberated and discussed. I just don't think we can do it twice, now and then when we vote on the 6th.
We can do it twice. We can probably do it 3 or 4.
We're good at that, aren't we?
Well, may I ask the question? I thought this meeting was to allow us an opportunity to ask questions about the amendments. Questions about other things that are in the budget that are not involved in the amendments can be discussed at any time, can they not? Alderman? I'm talking to you, Alderman Gay. Of course.
Listen, the last thing I ate was 2 slices of pizza at 1 o'clock. I really want to finish this, but I'm saying, like, we need to take 5 or something, because we're going to be here all night if we continue. That's my point.
But if we contain our questions to specific questions.
All right, so you're going to stick to 6-figure
Let me
amounts?
finish.
Okay.
If we contain our questions to specific questions about the amendments, so we have clarity about what they are, then we should be able to get through them. Alderwoman Pendle Charles has already done hers.
No, she hasn't, not in my view.
Well, okay, but you can have an opportunity to ask questions for clarity, okay? I want clarity on the on the firefighters' budget, because it's the biggest ticket item. So, there's a motion on the floor. I'm still going to oppose it.
Yeah, okay. Have we? Nope, never.
Yes, there's a motion on the floor.
So if we do that, then we have to promise that when June 6th, we go through them and vote, because we've gotten enough clarity.
There will be no such promise.
Yeah, get that.
We just ask that you give us the opportunity to finalize these amendments. They have to be finalized.
Yeah.
So I'll make an editorial comment. We have a word from the city manager that we can schedule another meeting to follow through with the rest of these. But we have a motion on the floor that is seconded to adjourn. All in favor of adjourning signify by by raising your hand. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Mr. City Manager, I do hope we can.
Do we have a preference between next Thursday or next Friday?
What's next
afternoon?
Monday? What's Monday?
Memorial Day.
I think we should do it on Monday.